What's up world? It's Willy What If here with another new video on the channel. This is episode 9 of What If Deku Gave Up on Being a Hero? Although, the more we get into the story, the more I think we may need a more fitting name. Let me know what you think in the comments. Now, let's get into it. Part 9. Run that by me one more time please. And quat. Rikido kept a nervous smile on as his sidekick gave him such a look of suspicion. Pulling his own chair back, the sugar hero laughed a bit and tried not to have his plan blown. Then he calmed himself and gave the Greenate a cool, laid-back expression like he should have done. It's simple. You, me and a few other guys I know are gonna head to a little party being thrown by Midnight's old agency. Her sidekicks took over after her death and are keeping her name alive, partly by throwing these little shindigs, and we need you to come along so we can get Bakugo into a new relationship. And quat. Izuku gave a raised eyebrow, but Rikido continued before he could object. I know you probably don't have the highest opinion of the guy, but he's losing his mind and we have to help him before he goes off the deep end. If any of us try to reach out to him, then he'll shoot us down. You on the other hand seem to bring him wherever you go. So can you just come so we can not have this whole idea fail? And quat. The quirkless man scowled for a moment as he contemplated the thought. Here was on one of the few days left in his week off from his day job, a weekday no less, talking to his other employer who was asking for a personal favor for the sake of someone he loathed. Yet on the other hand, it was kind of hard to have Katsuki as much when the man gave him that money and admittedly had a lonely feeling about him. Why else would the guy be asking to hang out with a nobody like him? Judging from how other people in the field that he met, he wasn't very liked even if he was the #1 hero. Hard not to feel a little pity for the fucker. Then there was the fact that if that asshole found someone else to hook up with, then he'd forget about Ochako and leave her alone, which helps himself, her and Himiko. Plus this could also serve as a connection platform for the agency. Eyeing his boss, Izuku pulled out a little top-flipping notepad from a jacket pocket and clicked a pen. Aside from getting Bakugo laid, is there anything else I should do? Any shoulders I should rub? And quat. The more muscled man waved a hand dismissively with a smile. Nah, you just head with me and a few of my guys while we tow Bakugo along. Stick around for a few hours, mingle a little, that sort of thing as we start throwing women his way, alright? I know you're taken, but just hang out and that's it. And quat. Musing on it, Izuku guessed he could stay out late. Himiko might complain, but he can make it up to her later and Rosie's there to keep her company until he gets back. If not, well, he pictured doing something nice for her, maybe letting her cut him a few times. She really seemed to like that. Though it scared the hell out of him, he supposed it would be fair with him leaving her for so long. Granted, he also wanted to get off too. Maybe they try butt stuff? She'd be happy with whatever, so he decided to let her bite him for however long she pleased, with the assumption she'd work her magic on him while doing so, or Ochako if she was around. Accepting the fact that he was becoming a bit of a sex addict, Izuku put his pad and pen away and pulled out his phone before answering to his boss. Alright, deal, but I'm not spending more time with him than I gotta, and if I have to leave for whatever reason, please don't twist my arm about it. And quat. Rikido gave him a thumbs up, and so Izuku looked up Katsuki's number, made a prayer to the god of fate and fortune, and hit the call button. It connected after the first ring and the pro's voice just irked him with how overjoyed it sounded. Hey Deku, what's up? Everything okay? And quat. Izuku gave a nervous laugh as he suppressed a long-held fear and resentment that raised his blood pressure. Nothing much, Kachan, but there's this little party that Sato's dragging me to and I was wondering if you wouldn't mind coming with us to help me not die of awkwardness. And quat. Izuku swore he could feel a smile just manifest on the bastard's face. Sure thing man, be at the agency in a few minutes. See ya then. And quat. The call ended and Izuku put his phone back with a minor grimace, only to see the absolutely amazed expression on the actually decent hero's face. How the fuck did you do that? No one, not even Uraka, could get that asshole to do anything that quickly. And quat. Izuku shrugged. Maybe he's just bored and was waiting for something like this. It's not that rare to be bored out of your mind with nothing to do at certain times. And quat. Rikido shook his head in disbelief before getting up from his chair and grabbing his coat off the hook on the right side to the door of his office. If you say so. Come on, we have a train to catch. And quat. Following after the anti-diabetic, Izuku was greeted by a sound that made his blood run cold with a rapid, ear-shattering boom coming from above as they exited the agency. Katsuki had arrived within seconds after the call, and judging by the smell he knew why. The fucker was drenched in sweat, or nitroglycerin rather. Dressed in a stained wife beater under a puffy jacket that matched his black jeans and sneakers, the #1 hero arrived with a masterful landing right in front of the two lesser crime fighters, grinning like a madman. He was panting with the haste of a marathon runner, and without another word he rushed over to the quirkless man and hugged him. Hey Deku, sorry I took so long. And quat. Patting his former punching bag on the back, he turned to his old classmate and grinned with a wave. Sup sweets, everything going okay? And quat. Rikido returned the smile and clasped the upright hand with a smirk. Yep, me and Mophead are handling things, Now how about we get going before the night gets any older ? And quat. Bakugo returned the smirk, violently ruffling Izuku's hair once he pulled his hand away. That's the best idea you had in years. And quat. Resisting the urge to take the knife in his pocket and stick it in the bastard's gut, Izuku faked a smile and left with the pair. He was silent for the entirety of the train ride over to the station, glad that Sato had taken all of the attention off of him by going into a talk with Katsuki about old hero stuff that happened in their youth. The walk to the place was uneventful, with Izuku withdrawing into himself while the two pros just kept talking about history he had no part in. Soon they arrived at a brick-stacked building that clashed with the very idea of the R-rated heroine. May she ever rest in peace. It was a large bar about twice the size of Toshi's, judging from the exterior by the name of the last mark, and it radiated a slow, mellow atmosphere as they got closer. The exact opposite of what Izuku imagined the Midnight Boys to host. Honestly, he expected something far more obscene and nasty, not this local drinking hole vibe. Then to add to the confusion, the first people he saw were a man who wouldn't look out of place at his day job, with how his entire being gave off a disciplined, professional feel, exhaust pipes sticking out of his legs aside. Next to him was a raven-headed man who was in deep conversation with who had to be Shoji. Ojiro stood off to the side in a bland hoodie, staring in the newcomer's general direction. Upon the trio of Bakugo, Sato and Midoriya getting close enough, he perked up and waved an arm, getting everyone's attention. "Hey, you guys actually came." And quat. Bakugo scowled at the gesture, but to Izuku's surprise it was obviously in a good-natured way, where he grinned at the martial arts hero and the rest of his entourage. "Of course I'm here, you blind motherfucker. Of course, if you actually opened your eyes once in a while maybe you'd see I'm not one to give up on a plan." And quat. In an instant the tailed mutant launched himself forward with a jump that had his fifth limb spinning like a mace that was set to strike the number one hero. But Bakugo stepped forward without assistance from his quirk in the blink of an eye and was suddenly behind the still airborne mutant. He gave a kick faster than Izuku's eyes could track that halted the massive appendage of his comrade with a clash before the two broke apart and retook their stances. Katsuki smirked like he was living some old joke, and so was Ojiro as his tail flexed. The two kept their standoff until the higher ranking of the two spoke as he dropped his guard. "You still can't hit me even on a good day. Guess some things never changed." And quat. Ojiro kept his smile up, but Izuku could tell it was forced, and there was anger boiling underneath that was buried even deeper as the hero spoke. "Maybe Boom Boy, or maybe I just let you win like all the other times. That aside, how about you bring Mophead over so we can introduce him?" And quat. Taking the initiative to get away from his childhood bully, Izuku marched himself up to the pair of strangers and in his best, polite, corporate tone, bowed at a 45-degree angle to the both of them. "My name is Izuku Midoriya, known as the Limit Breaker when on duty. It's a pleasure to make your acquaintances." And quat. A glint of light shined behind the blue-haired hero's glasses, and without missing a beat bowed at a 90-degree angle before pulling out a business card from his back pocket. "It's no trouble, my name is Tenya Ida, also known by the hero name Ingenium." And quat. He gestured to the bird-headed mutant with both arms and a rather high innocent voice that denoted the speedster as a bit of a spastic. "And this is my friend Fumikage Tokoyami, also known as the Jet Black Hero, Tsukiyomi." And quat. The raven mutant nodded in greeting. "Hello Midoriya, Ricky has told us quite a bit about you." And quat. Izuku rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly at the attention, not sure on how to continue the conversation. "I hope it was good things. Anyway, now that that's out of the way, what's next?" And quat. He stopped mid-sentence when an arm was thrown around his neck and Ojiro began to hang off him with a cheeky smugness about him. "What's next is that we try and get Boom Boy laid before he pops a gasket." And quat. The martial arts hero threw a thumb in Bakugo's direction, who for once looked completely off guard by what was said. Anger blossomed on his face and even a noticeable blush that made him glow like a strawberry as he pointed an accusing finger at the trickster. "Hey, who the fuck said I need any of your fucking help getting some tail? I'm the number one hero, for fuck's sake. I can get any bitch I want in this whole country!" And quat. Ojiro opened his mouth to retort, but Izuku cut in before that could happen with some of his Yila skimming to the surface. "You talk a big game, Kachan, just like you always have, but if that's the case, then why haven't you?" And quat. Katsuki's anger and blush grew as he stomped forward with even more force behind him as he jabbed himself in the chest with his thumb. "Because I'm off saving the fucking world every fucking day, so I don't have time for a girl. If a bitch wants me so bad, then she should just be a chick and approach me, not the other way around!" And quat. Izuku smirked as he stared at him. "That sounds like a shitty excuse, Kachan. Are you scared some of them might say no? Is that why you never make the first move?" And quat. The blonde glared at him with a familiar rage as smoke simmered from his palms with the smell of brimstone. "I fucking said I can. I just don't fucking want it." And quat. Izuku shook his head and pushed himself off Ojiro as he approached the bastard in the most taunting stride he could. He grinned like a snake and put his arm around the man's neck in a brotherly fashion. "Then how about you prove it? After all, Kachan, I have faith in you as always, but I bet I can pull in more women than you." And quat. There was a dangerous edge to Katsuki's voice that changed the entire mood of the conversation and made the assembled pros flinch. "What the fuck did you just say?" ? Not backing down, Izuku kept his smile and forced the hothead to bend slightly as he gestured to the bar. "I'm saying I'm better at getting girls than you are, and if you want to prove me wrong then you and I gotta compete. The rules are simple, whoever leaves with the most numbers wins and those that don't, lose. Katsuki glared at him with the fury of a feral wolf, but soon paused and began to laugh once Izuku let go. He slapped the quirkless man on the back and now had a burning fire in his eyes. "Alright Deku, you're on. I'll show you you're still shit compared to me, but on the off chance you win, I'll owe you a favor. If I win then you gotta do the same for me. Izuku studied the man with squinting eyes before contemplating it for a moment. There was a surge of calm, refined homicide to his brain at the thought of this animal somehow using this favor to get between him and Himiko or Ochako. They were his women, his darlings, nobody else's. It was similar to what he felt when that bull-headed idiot tried to take Himiko from him, and he knew it showed in his eyes for the brief seconds it was there. Except Izuku suppressed it and slapped the monster on the back like they were the oldest of friends. "Deal Kachan. Now enough talking. The hunt awaits!" He said with a dramatic flair as the party of warriors made their way inside the bar. The interior was far more oriental in design with a few bits of Western influence such as booth tables, while the decor screamed Japanese. The place was packed with people of all kinds and it was still a low-pace atmosphere that was maybe a step or two above Toshi's due to the noise. Gripping Katsuki on the shoulder, Izuku kept his smug grin on and gestured to the east side of the establishment. "I'm heading over there, you go in the opposite direction, and as for the rest of the boys, it's up to them. Let's regroup in 2 hours and tally up the trophies." Katsuki grinned a challenge and raised a thumbs up as he went to the west end of the place, already starting a conversation with the first unaccompanied woman he saw, who looked absolutely starstruck upon seeing him, while the others followed him, leaving Izuku to tread the floor by himself as he wanted. The guy had no intention of actually hitting on any women when he had two waiting at home, but he decided to stay for the fact that it was the least rude thing he could do. So walking around, he parked himself at an empty table and waited, scanning the area until someone caught his eye. They were a short, black-haired woman whose hair was tied in a bow, dressed in a tan hoodie and jeans, who possessed a slight hunching posture, one larger than baseline left hand and a robotic prosthetic for a right one. She had the look of a mutant, but only slightly, and before long she made eye contact with him from across the floor. Not sure what else to do, Izuku gestured for her to come, and by some miracle, instead of getting creeped out, she actually approached him and took a seat. Blinking at the events, Izuku just relaxed after a moment and smiled. "So, are you also here because your friends dragged you along, or did you just feel like seeing the nightlife?" The girl shrugged and her voice came out in an oddly cute nasally tone that Izuku couldn't help but to grin at. "Just trying to kill time right now. I got the day off and the next day after that, so I'm just trying to figure out what to do with myself." "So you said your friends dragged you along on some night out? Are you a shut-in or a workaholic?" He shrugged as well. "Neither. My friend is the workaholic and I'm the only person able to coax him away from his desk. So I had to come along on this trip despite the fact I'm already in a relationship, because otherwise he would have just said no, and he really needs to find something else to focus on, you know?" The mutant's expression remained neutral as she leaned back a bit in her chairs. "Oh, don't get me started. There's one friend I have from high school who's a complete workaholic even by my standards, and so far all she's really done is just work and go home, even though she has enough money to retire 5 times over." She eyed him for a bit before continuing as she set her head on the table. "So if I can ask, what exactly do you have in mind to kill time? Because right now I don't feel like dealing with anyone, much less drunk douchebags who just want to try and get in my pants." He snorted a bit at that. "I personally couldn't blame them. You're very good looking for a mutant." She raised an indignant eyebrow at him. "The hell does that mean? You just assume that all mutant types are ugly and I'm the exception?" Another smirk came his way. He was loving the energy that was just radiating off of this woman, and frankly he couldn't get enough. The only one who can maybe match her was Ochako or Himiko. "Oh no, you misunderstand. I'm the type of guy that is really into mutants, but some wear their quirks better than others, and you are certainly one of them. Now enough of my talk. What's going on in your life, if you mind me asking?" The girl stared at him from the table for a moment, then started to talk as she sat back up. Not much. My little sister is starting high school. My dad just paid off the mortgage after so long. My mom is still in her survivors classes, and I just bought my own house out north a few months back. Like I said, not much. Now what about you?" Izuku thought about it. It wouldn't hurt to vent a little since he's likely never going to see this girl again after he leaves. "Well, I just entered into the 8th month relationship with my girlfriend, and it's been about a week since we let another girl into our relationship for reasons too personal to explain, and right now I'm trying to juggle work, them and my hobby." The woman raised another eyebrow at him like he was crazy. Wait, so you're in a relationship with 2 women at the same time and they know about it? How the hell does that work? And quat. Izuku laughed a bit. More than you think, less than I hoped. Basically it's the 3 of us dating each other, mainly because one holds a lot of power over the woman I adore, but it's a good situation. Granted, I feel a little out of my depth. And quat. She kept the eyebrow raised. So these women, are they mutants by any chance? And quat. He rolled his eyes as another laugh came out of him. I wish. That would make it so much better. But nah, they're both baseline aside from a few minor deviations to their eyes or fingers. Been with my darling for 8 months like I said and loved every second of it, and my Rosie about a week, and so far she's been great. Why do you ask? And quat. The girl pursed her lips for a second and spoke with crossed arms. I know mutants tend to be easier since most folks don't fancy them unless they're of your persuasion. One of my oldest friends, a girl with the head of a snake, managed to get manipulated into marrying some pervert she met in high school, and while it never got abusive and they're still together, he did some weird shit to her that makes me really uncomfortable to think about. And quat. Again she gave him a curious look after a quiet shiver of disgust at whatever she was seeing in her mind. What is it about mutants that you like so much? Like what gets you into them? And quat. Izuku pursed his own lips and broke the silence after a moment as a nostalgic smile found itself on his lips. Honestly, it's more to do with how my first encounter was with a mutant. We never went the full mile, but she was the only person who liked me back in the day, so one thing led to another, and still being in high school, let's just say she had an impact on me in a big way. To tell the truth, I still think about her every so often, but after the calamity we never got the chance to reconnect. And quat. Trapped in his memories for time, Izuku kept on talking. I miss her after all this time, not as much as I used to, but still. You know, my life would be completely different if I just said yes to one thing she asked me a long time ago, but I hesitated since I needed to build up the courage to accept, only to have that day be the one before the world went mad. But I have my darlings now, so I'm fine. And quat. There was a softer quality to the mutant at the sorrow in his voice, and thus she asked a question. What exactly do you like about them? And quat. The man shrugged once more and answered. My darling had been there for me even at my lowest. Hell, that's how we met. I was drunk, angry and depressed with nothing on my mind except for throwing myself over the edge of a bridge, but by some cosmic roll of the dice, I didn't. She talked to me and I talked to her, and we kind of fell into each other's lives. As for Rosie, she helps add to everything, but who knows. And quat. A look of concern and sympathy ruled over her at those words, and she placed her organic hand over his, seeming to be almost apologetic at what happened. Do you want to talk about it? And quat. Izuku paused at the sentiment and patted her laid hand softly, taking note of the rough, almost dry texture of the skin. Not really. All you gotta know is that I'm better now. So to change the subject, because I know this'll haunt me forever if I don't, would you mind if I ask? And quat. The girl shifted her eyes to her prosthetic and flexed the fingers, which moved silently and efficiently with the same speed as a normal hand would. She sighed as she observed the ionized steel of the limb before looking back at the man. Lost it during the war after a Nomu bit it off. That took me out of the fight for a bit, and since rewind shots weren't around at the time, I couldn't just have them fix my arm, because anything longer than a month has the chance of messing with the entire body, and I had this for a year before they came out. Thankfully this was a personal favor from a couple of my old friends, so it's as good as having the original one. And quat. She shook her head at the dulled reflection in the arm and kept talking. Good thing Miro introduced Melissa to May when they got married, otherwise I'd never be able to have such a decent one. And quat. Izuku gauged the reaction of the girl as she was still lost in memory before she came back to reality with a slight glint of regret in her eyes. She stared at him for another moment before banishing some of the gloom. That aside, now let me ask something about you. What exactly do you do aside from chatting up lonely mutants and screwing 2 women at the same time? And quat. He smiled and pulled out an employee ID of his day job. I crunch numbers and manage accounts for a company that handles distribution and finance for other businesses. Aside from that, I usually do community service when I get the time. What about you? What do you do to pad out the time of your life? And quat. The girl mused on it for a moment before reaching into her shirt and taking out a necklace that was tucked firmly between her rather nice chest. It was a circular steel pendant no larger than a 500 yen coin or an American quarter, with a strange symbol of a winged staff stuck between 2 serpents with fins at the end of their tails. I mainly do rescue work for the Coast Guard and survey work on the ocean. Used to be into the crime fighting part of the industry, but after my little brother passed away from getting stabbed during the war and I lost my arm, my dad made me swear it off. Honestly, I'm semi-retired since I mainly live out on the sea most days of the year, and the government pays me benefits from the stuff I went through in the war. Really, I only bought the house so I can have my own place that isn't filled with chatty nature freaks. And quat. A light glowed in Izuku's eyes, one like that of a child eager to hear a story, as he smiled at her. You know, I've never been out on the ocean before. Can you tell me how it is? And quat. The girl considered his request before a far-off glaze filled her eyes as she began to speak in a way that seemed like she knew it perfectly. Being at sea, really being within the realm of it where you can't see anything but water for miles upon miles in every direction is wonderful yet horrifying because you learn almost instinctively that it isn't your domain. That at any moment the sea could swallow you up if it chose to, or whatever is lurking in the depths could emerge and do the same. And quote. Continuing her talk, the woman kept her gaze to the empty air above him as she saw memories held deeply inside her. Most folk don't get much further than a half knot from the shoreline, where everything is nice, shallow and safe, but once you take 4 knots out it's like the whole world vanishes. There's always the smell of salt and fish in the air that just rises up from below like an ever-present stench while the tides flip and shimmer around you, mixing in with the sound of gulls calling from above and the wind rushing past. Her fingers curled into fists as she went on. It can be so quiet when the water calms, like God flipped an off switch for everything. Sometimes when the sea doesn't move and everything is still, it can reflect the sky like a mirror to the point you can start to doubt which way is up if you stare for too long. Then night happens, and those times where it's calm and not moving, that's when you get the feeling deep in your bones that the sea can just devour you without even blinking. Then there are storms that make the waves and rain crash against your boat, your only lifeline in the water, and threaten to sink it with how fast and violent the winds are. Almost like you're in the presence of some ancient, hungry devil. And quote. Another shake of the head came from her. My first time out on the water after the war, when I got my replacement arm, I was with a crew of other people I knew. It was supposed to be a simple patrol detail that would last a week, 7 days on, 14 out, where we just made sure no vessels were in need of assistance. But when we passed 20 knots and were in the middle of it, everything went calm, and then 10, maybe 15 minutes later these thick, gray clouds started to roll in from the east, and before long they covered the sky. And quote. A shiver came through her with a silence that lasted for 3 moments before she breathed again. Then it began to pour these fat, heavy raindrops that were carried on this gust of wind that rose from the east and made it come in so fast it went sideways. No one could see the hand in front of their face, so the captain of the crew ordered us to batten everything down and retreat to the cabin. The waves rocked our ship, knocking everything that wasn't strapped down to the floor, and as the 10 of us monitored the radars, manned the communication radios and checked the integrity systems, there came a wave in front of the bow of the ship. It had to be 2 stories tall, and it just went up and up into the air with only our searchlights showing it. And quote. She clutched at the amulet with her original hand and continued. Then it came down like an avalanche. We were far enough away that it didn't overtake us completely, but the water beneath us rose up when it hit the sea and our ship caught air. For 10 seconds we were weightless, then we crashed like a rock, and the system said there was a breach in the lower hull of the ship and we were taking on water fast. Not sure what to do, I grabbed my gear along with the repair epoxy and rushed out the cabin with my quirk keeping me stuck to the vessel. And quote. She rubbed the necklace like a talisman as she went on. My captain shouted some orders when I turned the corner, but I couldn't hear her over the storm as I went below deck. I could see the tier in the hull the second I stepped down, and so I leapt to the other end where the force from the fall had broken it open and started spraying the gel. Water kept flooding in, but thankfully this stuff was space age since it repaired the tier in seconds. After that, I just grabbed a bucket and started bailing water out as best I could until one of my shipmates dragged me back into the cabin. When I was back inside, the captain had no other option in sight other than to sail through the rest of the storm, and by some miracle we managed to get to a clearing right as it began to fade away. And quote. A smile began to form over her face, one of wonder and amazement that banished most of the previous dread. We saw the blue of the sky again and the clouds began to move away. Then when we had gotten enough distance to stop and breath, there was this massive rainbow that was larger than anything possible on the mainland, and it hugged the sunlight so well that it was like something out of a fairy tale. And quote. The smile had taken over now, and it had a sense of childlike wonder about it that burned brighter than any fear or dread, and Izuku felt his soul just absorb the happiness with his own dumbstruck smile as she went on. That's not even the most amazing thing I've seen out there, and that's why I can never give it up. It's adventure in its purest form, with mysteries and things that most people can't even imagine. And even on a mundane voyage where nothing spectacular happens and I just dot the log and listen to the radio, I'm free. Free to do as I wish with no laws or regulations to weigh down on my passion to help people, and even if I died out there, I know I would die happy. And quote. She blinked at her actions upon finishing her trance and realized what she did and blushed a bit in embarrassment. Sorry about that, I tend to get a little overboard when talking about sailing. And quote. There hadn't been a time in Izuku's life where he was so hungry to hear more about anything aside from his early days and those 2 golden years of high school. He knew he was giving that giddy smile he used to make when he watched All Might videos before the man crushed his dreams, but he was too enthralled to care. Are you kidding? That was the greatest story I've heard in a long time. So happened to your crewmates? Were you reprimanded for what you did? How did you get back home? What's your quirk like? How did? And quote. The mutant let out a deep, nasally laugh that sounded halfway between a series of snorts and giggles as she raised her hands up to stop his barrage of rapid-fire questions. Easy there, skipper, one at a time with the questions. I barely remember half of this stuff. And quat. Izuku couldn't help but smile at how cute her laugh was. It was like Himiko's except more, down to earth in a way. He pulled out a pad and pen from a pocket and clicked it with a sudden hunger to know in his eyes. Well, if you don't mind answering one at least, could you tell me about your quirk? I'm kind of a geek about that stuff. And quat. She actually appeared faltered when he asked that and even looked off to the side of the floor to avoid the interest in his eyes. Gosh, you really want to know about my quirk? Most people just assume it's only skin deep and leave it at that. And quat. He grinned with a far more sympathetic light as he flipped the pen in his fingers. Most people are wrong. Quirks are beautiful gifts even if most don't see it. They make a person unique like no one else. Even if they have similar quirks to another person, it's still their own. Something that they can never have taken from them and shows a part of their personality that nothing else can. Honestly, even with people who have weak quirks or mutant quirks or villainous quirks, I'm always so jealous because that's them, you know? It's the human soul made into physical art that can let a person live an extraordinary life that 5 generations ago would be considered impossible. And quat. His words reached the girl and she studied him for a few seconds before cutting in. You're quirkless, aren't you? And quat. Izuku flinched at the assumption like it had struck him in the face and was the one looking to the floor to avoid her stare. Swallowing his fear and shame at his disability, he tried to not shrink at his darkest secret being found out. Yeah, is that a problem? And quat. She was silent for a moment before giving him an I understand with her eyes and gripping one of his hands for a bit. Not at all. Us rejects gotta stick together. As for my quirk, it's called Tree Frog and it has 4 main parts that let me use it. Firstly, it increases the strength in my legs by a factor of 20 so I can jump for half a mile in a single bound or shatter concrete with a kick. Secondly, it lets me extend and control my tongue. It will like a limb so I can wrap it around anything I want and it can stick to any surface. Thirdly, the tips of my fingers and toes can secrete a compound through my pores that let me stick to any surface. Fourthly, I can also spit out my stomach if I want, but that isn't very cool. That's about it. And quat. He furiously scribbled down what was said before more questions popped up in his head. Looking up, he shot her a curious glance. Are you cold-blooded by any chance? I know those with reptilian or amphibian style quirks have a 25% chance of that happening. And quat. The woman smiled at him, seeming genuinely pleased with his knowledge. Yeah, actually, if the temperature ever hits below 10 degrees then my body will shut down and go into a hibernating state and I won't wake up until I'm warm again. And quat. There was a mad spark of intrigue as Izuku snapped his fingers as something clicked in his head. Wait, if that is the case and your quirk has most of the qualities of a tree frog, then wouldn't that mean you could survive a form of cryostasis? Frogs have been known to usually come out with no problems after years of being in suspended animation, so it would stand to reason that you could too. And quat. A giggle came from the girl as she covered her mouth as she tried to answer with more snorting laughter. I don't know. I never tried it and I doubt I will, but I guess it's possible ribbit if I did. And quat. She kept laughing for a few seconds before Izuku cut in with an admittedly enthralled demeanor at how unbelievably cute that noise sounded. Hold up, did you just ribbit like a frog? And quat. She paused her laughter as a self-conscious dread overtook her joy with a lowered head that plucked at the heartstrings. Yes, is that a problem? And quat. Now Izuku was laughing this time as he did his best to put the mutant at ease as he put away his pad and pen. No, it's honestly one of the most adorable things I've seen. And quat. That earned him a smile in return as she slowly sat up again. It's good to know, not a lot of people. And quat. There came an audible vibration from her pants pocket and soon she pulled out her phone and let out a sigh that Izuku knew all too well as she muttered under her breath, "Goddamn it, Dad." And quat. Before answering it with a less than forced look of happiness. "Hi Daddy." And quat. She nodded a bit and pursed her lips as she responded to a question Izuku couldn't hear. "Yes, I've been out a while, but." And quat. She was interrupted by something from the other line that seemed to kiss her off even more. "Yes, I understand she hasn't seen me in a month and Mom is making dinner, but." And quat. A scoff came from her as she was interrupted again, only for her to raise her voice a little. "Because I'm on a date and you keep butting in." And quat. It was then Izuku flinched at the statement, not sure what he was being dragged into right when the girl seemed to realize what she said and silently sucked air through her teeth. They both made awkward eye contact, but to her credit, she had gotten the desired results when after a few seconds she said a pleasant goodbye to her father and the call ended. Putting the phone away, she pursed her lips apologetically. "Sorry about that. My dad can be a bit of a control freak when I'm on dry land. Love him to death, but he still sees me as his little girl." And quat. Izuku waved a dismissive hand as he reached for another blank notepad he kept in his other pocket. "Hey, it's no issue. I know what it's like to have helicopter parents. That being said, could you do me a favor and write as many made-up phone numbers on this thing that you can think of? I made a bet and I don't want to lose." And quat. The woman grinned and grabbed the objects, clicking the pen with a challenging gaze. "Sure." And quat. 10 minutes passed and 2 pages were filled with phony digits pressed in a rather elegant handwriting as the girl flipped the pages to another blank one and tore it out. She wrote down another number with a name over it. Then she stood up and offered him her hand. "Well, it's been pleasant, but I really do gotta go see my people again. Give me a call if you ever wanna shoot the breeze." And quote. Izuku did likewise and shook her hand as he stood up. "Not a problem. Name's Izuku Midoriya by the by. Also, is that ship of yours ever looking for new crew members? Because I'd love to try that line of workout." And quote. They parted hands and the mutant grinned. "I'm called Tsuyu Asui, but you can call me Tsuyu. As for my ship, I'll have to think about it, but I'll be sure to keep in touch. Tell your girlfriends I said hello, okay?" And quote. With that she walked towards the exit and left, leaving Izuku with an actual phone number that he instantly placed in his contacts and book of fake ones that he hurried to show Kachan, only to find him absent from the bar when he looked around and find Rikido chipping away at a rum and coke. The man told him Katsuki left with 5 women in tow and just left. Once he was gone, Ojiro had gone back home to see his wife while Ida and Tokoyomi went elsewhere for the night. Izuku was glad with this and offered the hero a good night as they both began to make their way to the train station together since Izuku had issue leaving his slightly intoxicated employer to fend for himself. Later Izuku headed off to Himiko's, feeling a rush at the thought of getting to see her again, before remembering to tear up the numbers and trash them to avoid any unnecessary conflict. Half an hour later he arrived at her block and before long he arrived at her apartment. The door swung open and there she was, crusty and lovely as always in those dirty pajamas, like a sleep-deprived Cinderella. She gave a soft smile at his arrival and Izuku needed no further invitation to come in. Putting an arm around her as the door shut behind him, he kissed her forehead and stroked her cheek with his thumb. Himiko kissed him in the proper way and gently moved his hands to the torso. "Could you rub my back? I've been sitting so long that I'm all stiff." And quote. Izuku picked her up without a word and carried her to the bedroom where he laid her on the mattress. He removed his shirt and then her shirt and bra so nothing would get in the way. Running his palms over the flat of her back, he started to feel around for the tense areas of muscle and hesitated. "Do you want me to put some ointment on like last time? Maybe a little moisturizing cream so you aren't so chapped back here? It might help you feel better." And quote. The assassin hummed for a bit and shrugged. "If you want, really I just want a back rub." And quote. Taking the hint, Izuku went to the bathroom to grab the cream and slathered his hands with it, but not before he leaned in and kissed her neck just once. "I love you darling." And quote. She smiled a little at his words. "I love you too, you big baby." And quote. Cool sensations ran up his hands as he started to softly caress and massage his lover's back, hear her groan and moan in relief-fueled pleasure as he worked out the kinks in her back the best he could. They didn't talk during this. She was too caught up with the pain and the release he was giving, and Izuku was becoming more removed from the situation as he focused on massaging her like a piece of fine art where her back was his canvas. Eventually she signaled for him to stop and so he climbed onto the bed and kissed her as she started to stretch. They tangled for a bit before Himiko nuzzled into his chest with a pleased face while Izuku reached for a bit in her hand. Again he kissed her, making her giggle at his attention like a content puppy while Izuku noticed something. "Any clue where Ochako is?" And quote. Himiko shrugged and hugged him fondly as she listened. "Chiki had to work today so she couldn't come over. She told me so, but you were busy." And quote. He sighed and pushed the bloodsucker off him carefully as he got off the bed to pick up his shirt. "Get your clothes on and pack an overnight bag. We're going to go see her. It's the least we can do." And quote. A heavy annoyance and disappointment filled the slasher, but she knew he wouldn't budge on the matter, so she did as he ordered. 20 minutes later they were both cuddling on a train to the far nicer side of the nation, and in 2 hours they arrived at Ochako City. Her apartment wasn't hard to find, and to their luck, when they knocked, her pink-cheeked face greeted them with shock as she stood in a bathrobe stained with old pink ice cream stains. "What are you guys doing here?" And quote. Izuku gave her a knowing grin and ushered Himiko forward with a light pat on the ass as she stepped inside, and he took the heroine gently by the hand. Shutting the door, it was suddenly just the three of them, and Izuku hugged her warmly while the blonde rolled her eyes, but joined in, squishing the brunette between them. Ochako was still in mild shock at their arrival, but Izuku merely picked her chin up while Himiko nuzzled into her shoulder. "We're here to see you, silly. We missed you and you always said you hated being alone, so here we are, keeping you company like you did for us." And quote. She blinked at his words as with understanding came a few stray tears lurking in her eyelids as Ochako returned the hug to the both of them as a profound gratitude filled her voice. "Thanks guys, you have no idea how badly I needed this right now." And quote. Himiko squeezed her a little more around the belly and kissed her neck as she spoke up while Izuku caressed her back. "That's what we're here for, Chiki. We exist to make you feel good in content. Now is there anything we can do to make you happy?" And quote. A single tear flew down her cheek as she pointed to her bedroom. "I need to go to sleep right now, but if you guys wouldn't mind, can we lay together, please?" And quote. Suddenly she was in the air as Izuku hefted her up bridal style while Himiko climbed on his back after he squatted down, and in seconds they were in her bedroom. She was still in Izuku's arms as Himiko climbed down and opened the covers of the queen-sized mattress. The next second the blonde's clothes were gone and she had started to pull away at the bathrobe when Izuku set her down. Ochako didn't offer a fight and let herself be undressed by the woman, who soon did the same to Izuku. They each were naked now and Himiko took her by the arm and dragged into bed. In the same instance Himiko clung to her like a chimp before another, larger set of arms wrapped around her belly instead of her back. The villainous kissed her tenderly, then Izuku planted his lips on her as well. Then he kissed Himiko right as he hit the lights. Not sure what to do with the affection, Ochako was awash with good feelings right as a strong sucking sensation attacked her neck while their hand caressed her body and let her know we're here for you and quat. Letting herself get swept up in the buzzy feelings, she returned the favor as her consciousness was slowly giving way to sleep. I love you guys. And quat. The two began to kiss on her cheeks while occasionally breaking off to kiss each other while they too started to slip away into a good sleep. We love you too Rosie. And quat. We love you too Cheeky. And quat. The anti-gravity heroine dreamed with a joyful smile under the force of her lover's passions for her, and she saw such a good future for them with their children they would have eventually. As she did so, Ochako knew that little encounter at the bar and confessing her desires was the best thing she ever did. She knew nothing could ruin it because it was so perfect and she was loving every second of it. Himiko wasn't sure what she disliked more, the mouthful of brown hair or the crushing sensation on her back that reeked of sweat, body odor and masculine most while something hard poked against her cheeks. The sound of snoring echoed off the walls and she felt sweaty and overheated being in the middle of her two sleeping lovers along with an unreasonably fluffy comforter. Sitting up she felt her own sweat drip off her back and she had to struggle to breathe for a moment, her feline eyes seeing in the darkness as well as a normal woman could see in the daylight. Both of them were still out cold and it was only 4 a.m. by the look of the clock on the nightstand. She sighed in annoyance as she silently got out of the bed without waking another thanks to her talents for stealth, though she felt her heart squeeze a bit when Izuku grunted and flared around in an unconscious search for her. That was until he touched Ochako, who rolled over like a lot and satisfied his unquenchable urge to cuddle. Himiko had half a mind to slap him straight on the ass and see how they'd react, but as funny as that was, the blonde had more pressing matters such as breakfast. Turning away with her still nude body, she went around gathering up her clothes and covering herself before entering the kitchen. Her overnight bag laid on the dining table where she left it, so she opened the bag and fished out a micro cooler filled with 2 packs of blood which she downed in moments. It was always one of the best parts about waking up, but that only fulfilled one of 2 needs, thus she needed to raid the pantry. Carefully Himiko moved to the other side and opened a cabinet to find a box of bland, whole oat cereal. She frowned at the object. It wasn't as good tasting as she hoped the chubby heroine would stock, but whatever. Opening another cabinet she pulled out a bowl and spoon, set them on the table and made her piddly breakfast. Maybe she could bug Izuku to go fetch something more tasty when he got up? For some reason she had a craving for a cheeseburger of all things, but she wasn't picky. Chomping on a dry spoonful of oats, she thought for a moment in the silence of the far nicer apartment. She thought back to her mania and the vague echoes of what she said or did. All she knew was that there was an urge in her at the time, not one of murder or torture or extreme violence like when her quirk took over, but it was one of her more excited moods and quat. She pictured it for a moment and couldn't find a mental reference other than a slight tingle in her groin and an overwhelming sense of pride and superiority. Base emotions that made her feel good in an animal way, and along with them came one thing, one fantasy that she often wrote about in her work. Sticking her tongue inside a nice, inch-long gouge in his chest as he moaned and caressed her skin, just begging and whining for her attention. It was an association from years of wanting that fantasy, but still she had a grin on her face as her cheeks began to get rosy. She liked the idea very much, even if it was more than a little inappropriate at this time, or was it really? She was in a relationship with those two, so why couldn't she make a request right now? After all, they would all feel good. So Himiko halted her mind and where it was going. Right now she needed to step back and review everything going on inside her, even if she was getting an itch and quat. It wasn't fair to Zuzu or Cheeky to just throw her mind into senseless passion, especially when those drives tended to have life-threatening dangers for those she loved. She froze as a disgusted shiver came from old memories and anguished faces that refused to stop haunting her. Put it away, Himiko. Those days are behind you now. You're better now and you don't want to take things that far. You love Zuzu, he loves you, and Cheeky is right with you. Just let the dead fade away. And quat. She whispered to herself as her former loves and what she did to them played out before her mind in a hyperflash of gore. There came an even greater twitching and discomfort between her legs at the scenes despite her shame. She still enjoyed it in a fucked up, twisted way that made the worst parts of her mind and quirk just scratch at the surface of her brain, but she loathed it. Himiko never wanted to have anyone go through that, much less the first. Second man she ever loved and loved her back for who she was, though she knew if someone wronged her enough and she hated them, then she knew it wasn't off the table. But Again, that was all behind her now. She felt an ache at the base of her teeth that chewing the cereal barely helped, and with it she tried to control her heavy breathing. Now would be a good time for more blood. She wasn't in danger of actually snapping like she did when she was a teen, but it always helped quell her more unusual urges. Pushing it aside, the blonde considered what she should do today with all her work done for the week. Zuzu likely had to go back to work today or maybe tomorrow if she was lucky, and Chiki had her obligations as an actual pro hero. That didn't leave her with a lot of options that didn't involve watching shitty TV in her pajamas or writing her next smutty romance novel alone in that shack she called home. A sorrow filled her at the thought of that empty, lonely place with only herself for company, away from the man who adored her and the friend she owed everything to. She had been alone enough for an entire lifetime. Maybe she could have Izuku stay over? Thinking about it, she considered putting on something nice that would convince him to obey her. What exactly did she have in her wardrobe that he hadn't seen? That nice black lingerie, her leather corset with the nipples cut out, those he had seen. Maybe something animal themed, like a cat girl outfit or maybe a school uniform. She grimaced again. No, she would not be wearing that around him ever. He deserved so much better from her. Perhaps, actually, what if she convinced Chiki to help get him off again? She was out of costume ideas and the woman was the ultimate sex toy for them both, so why not? So long as she got first dibs on him like her status demanded, then it would be fine. Then again, if Ochako was unavailable, then maybe she should do more tricks for him? Suck him off maybe? He probably won't like that given how her teeth were shaped, so what else? She did promise he could use her butt, so maybe? Himiko wasn't looking forward to it, but if that kept him by her side and not alone then it would be okay. Hell, she may actually like it, or she'd literally shit the bed, either or. There came a yawn as two figures shuffled out of the bedroom, both of which were sweaty, nude and half asleep as they shambled forward. Chiki made her way almost instinctively to the coffee machine while Zuzu made his way over to where the blonde was sitting and kissed her before going to join the heroine by greeting her with a kiss as well before the dreaded coffee breath took hold. Gradually he put on his clothes and laid out the brunettes neatly on the sofa as he glared at the villainess to come here like a petulant, needy baby. She, of course, gave in and put her finished bowl to the side and approached the quirkless man who wrapped his arms around her and brought her to the floor in an attempt to cuddle, which just made her feel good as they both flopped around on the ground until they found the perfect position. Zuzu nuzzled against her while Ochako watched passively from the table, the woman's mind still half asleep as she sipped her bean juice. You guys ever get the feeling it's too early in the day for that kind of stuff? I mean, we just got up. And quat. Izuku glared at the heroine again like a petulant and needy baby that Himiko just adored, and pointed a finger in her direction with all the threat of a teddy bear. No, and to prove that, we're going to cuddle you to death now. And quat. Himiko smiled at the goofiness of the idea and got up with her beloved, ready to pounce on her best friend, only to see Ochako give a "I'm tired of your bullshit" look. The brunette gestured to her coffee and let a hard edge enter her voice. Not till I'm done. And quat. The pair frowned at her words, but Izuku managed to smile and take a seat opposite her. Then can we do anything for you? And quat. She shook her head and sipped her brew, looking crabby and annoyed at his words. No, just let me finish my drink in peace. He sighed at her response with quite a bit of disappointment and was about to speak when a jingle came from his pocket. Taking out his mobile, Izuku read something on it that made him frown as he put it back and stood up. Well, looks like they need me at the office in an hour. I'm going to head out now, so save time. And quat. He leaned over and pecked the brunette on the lips while groping one of her tits before scooping Himiko up and kissed her far more deeply as he set her back down. Love you both. I'll be back before 6 and we'll do something tonight. And quat. With that, Izuku left to go handle his day job, leaving the two women to themselves. Stirring her cup with a spoon, Ochako glared at the door where he exited. Honestly, the nerve of that guy to just up and fucking leave without giving me a better kiss. Anyway, Miko, do you have anything to do today? Because I'm off for the day, so what's your thing? And quat. Himiko shrugged and moved to grab a mug as well, which soon held freshly brewed coffee. It wasn't her favorite, but better than nothing. Taking a seat on the other end, she studied the heroine and decided to maybe clear the air a bit, if only for her own worries. So, can I ask why you suddenly seem all over me compared to all the times after I got better? And quat. Ochako stared back at her and gave an eye roll as she finally finished her cup. Because just dealing in that way with you alone after everything we've put each other through is worrying. I never knew if I swung that way and I was worried about having a bad effect on your mental health. And quat. She looked off to the side as she continued with a slight tinge of disgust lingering under her skin. Not to mention I'm not really into the whole blood play thing. With Zuki here he kinda scratches your back in a way I just refuse. Like I said, Miko, I love you like a sister, but there's a part of me that is just always worried about you, and Izuku evens us both out. Honestly, he and you make the sex 1,000 times better. And quat. Her fingernails tapped on the wood of the table for a moment as guilt played out on her pink-cheeked face before she spoke. Speaking of which, I know you and Izuku have a special thing and you're both kind enough to let me into it, so I'm grateful. But, I need more. More of him, more of you, and us just fiddling around the deed is getting old. Look Miko, I'm sorry to say, but I have needs and Izuku isn't cutting it all the way when he just pussyfoots around, and the only reason he hasn't plowed me is because of you. Now I have more experience than you, so I can coach him until you're both ready to make that step. That way your first time won't be just him slipping it in and then immediately firing off before he can even move. And quad. Himiko looked utterly blindsided by the suggestion, but Ochako kept an even glance as she continued. Trust me Miko, your first time is one of the most important things in your life, and if Zuki just ends up rushing through it because he's never been desensitized to the feeling of a woman, then it won't be as magical as it could be. I've already been there, so just let me train him for a while, let him get used to the feeling, and things will be a lot better for us all. And quad. Anger wasn't the correct word. She wasn't murderous or livid, but neither was she passive at the idea. They had shared Zuzu on a few occasions, so it wasn't utterly out of nowhere, and Chiki did have a right to say what she wanted from them. Yet Himiko leveled a dangerous gaze that was quickly turned over when she remembered who she was talking to. She could trust this woman, so she let her worry and indignation show while trying to remain sociable. Ochako, I think that's a bit much to ask of him and me, but I get it and you have a point. I know it'll probably make Zuzu happy since he'll actually be able to go all the way with someone, instead of having to deal with me. Yet, is it weird that the thought scares me? That I'm worried you're going to make him love you more than me and he'll run away with you? And quad. The heroine softened her eyes and reached a hand to caress the blondes as she pursed her lips. Miko, I think you severely underestimate how much that man loves you. He's told me so many things about you and he almost never has anything bad to say about you, and just the way he acts and shows that love. I'm going to be frank here Himiko, the intensity that man has for you and how he absolutely adores you. It's nothing like I've seen from anyone else. Katsuki was never that devoted to me, and there's probably a million other girls out there who would kill to have a boyfriend that is so loving. And quad. She ran a thumb over the former slasher's knuckles at those words. I could never match up to you in that regard, and to tell you the truth, Miko, I'm rather happy with this setup between the three of us. Because no matter how you think, I'm always going to be by your side since you need my help. Even all the way back then I looked out for you, and I always will so long as you don't let yourself relapse. This way, I can get everything I want. I get a husband who adores me, kids just bouncing around the house, to always keep an eye on you and know you're safe and happy. And quad. The woman pursed her lips and stood up from the table as a huff came from her nose. This really is the best for the three of us. Zuki gets his needs met, you get your partner in me and him, and I get my family without having to worry about it interfering with my obligations to you. We all just need time and it'll get better, but in the short term we just need to have those little first steps, and intimacy is the best way I can see it happening. And quad. There was a sound of cartilage popping from the table as Himiko stood up to meet her savior. Again, it wasn't dangerous or carried a threat. It was basic emotional tenseness that was cooled with a deep breath as she began to pace around the kitchen. Don't you think I want to give myself to him? I love that man as much as I did the League, but in an even deeper way. I have literally spread my legs out for him so many times, and if he wasn't so adoring and loving then he would have just taken me by now long before you got involved. There's so much I want to do with him, with you even Cheeky, but I fucking can T. And quad. Anger sparked behind her golden eyes as she bared her teeth, not quite at the heroine, but more the world itself. I can't let him love me like a man is made to do. I can't hang out with you in public. I can't go to Camino and visit the old bar. I can't even do more than step out to the corner store and buy something sweet because I made the decision in my youth to be one of the worst villains of the war. Zuzu and you are the only people I have left, the only bits of pleasure and human connection with people I know love me for who I am, and I'm so fucking horrified of him leaving that I just want to forget the past, but it won't let me! And quad. The bloodsucker threw her arms into the air with heavy exasperation as she had almost a depressive fury about her. But the fucked up thing is, I think he might be the only one, out of all the people I tried to date, who will look at my past and accept it. He might just listen and nod and hold me. I mean, I told him how I killed those 60 other heroes in my time and he outright said he didn't care! And quad. She began to walk about in a circle as disbelief filled her voice, still looking as blown away by the fact as she was that day. I outright told him about the murders, about how you saved me, about how my friends died, about how I was a fucking villain, and he still said he wanted to marry me. After all that shit, after I beat the fuck out of him, bit him, cut him, stole him from his own fucking mother, that stupid idiot still sees me as someone worth loving. He might accept me even if I told him about who I was and what I did when my quirk ran wild, but he also might not. This perfect, wonderful, loving fuck up of a man, a person I fall in love with more every fucking day to the point it's getting harder and harder to picture my life without him, will leave me because of my old mistakes, and it will only be my fault! And quad. Water teased at the edge of her eyelids as she felt her legs start to shake under the weight of her emotions. This is the most I can ever want out of life. I'm sane at last. I have a safe home and just a little spending money and a man who loves me for who I am, not just what I am. He does everything he can to make me happy and I do everything to ensure nothing hurts him ever again. I don't deserve him with how much he's been a light to my life and worships me, but if I let it slip about what I did to those people I wanted to become, I wouldn't blame him if he left and never came back. Ochako saw a tear fall from her greatest success as a hero and a person, and merely walked over and embraced her. The blonde wrapped her arms around her plump body and began to sob a little as the heroine guided them both back to the bedroom. Easing onto the sheets, the brunette ran her hand over Himiko's back, causing the villainess to lose her weight and float slightly in her arms. What exactly could she say to that? Simple murder alone was bad enough and Zuki had accepted it, even learning that Himiko took it up as a profession in her youth. But, those love killings she had done, even as she held the woman who did them, Ochako couldn't help but grimace in disgust. They were some of the worst acts of sadistic depravity on record since the emergence era. Men and women slain in their prime through days or weeks of slow, meticulous torture as blades slipped through and around the skin, or they were killed outright if the mood struck her or if she hadn't the time or preparation. Yet Ochako had seen more to the girl than her insanity, most of which came from her untreated quirk, and was proven right in that there was hope for Himiko, that the girl could reform herself and live a somewhat normal life after moving past what she did. Yet to be intimate with her in such a way as Izuku was and find out that she did that to those she claimed to love, then anyone with an ounce of self-preservation would bounce. Maybe they could explain it to him together that it was because of her quirk that she was clinically insane at the time? Akako was a hero and a former target of the girl for that, but she still vouched for her, so perhaps that would be enough to put Zuki's future worries at ease, regardless of them being warranted from a first impression. Shifting her hand down, the heavier woman felt almost annoyed at the state of things. Of course she understood Miko's worries and they were very real, but on the flip side it was just that one stupid secret that kept her from getting what she wanted. Just tell him, have a talk and a cry about it, and let's start actually having it. The more selfish part of her personality thought as Miko ceased crying and was cuddled up against her. She hated waiting. She hated not having that itch inside her scratched as much as Izuku was clearly able to do, and she hated not being able to go forward in their relationship between the three of them due to that one stupid secret. She wanted Himiko and him to pass that hurdle, say they loved each other, fuck, and be cool with building more of a life than living in their shitty apartment so that she could get her turn, so she could make her new dream a reality. They were running out of time and there was a house to buy and cribs to be built and weddings to plan and sex to be had and rings to be worn. Even if Izuku just used her for practice before he and Himiko consummated their relationship, it was better than this half-ass fucking waiting. Ochako spent her whole life waiting for the right time to do anything, and now that she had this opportunity where almost everything was in her control, even the people she was starting to love, there was still things in her way and it was so fucking minuscule. She had gotten over what Miko did, she was even attacked by the girl 4 separate times and a prime target for her insanity, and she considered her like a sister and maybe a little more now. So why the hell would Zuki think any differently when he's accepted the fact Himiko was a killer and even let her do her weird kinky stuff to him knowing she had the ability to kill him? She would never tell him about Miko's past without the woman's consent, but come the fuck on already. Why couldn't she just get this one thing, this one tiny thing out of life? Her plan for a 3-way relationship with Miko and him worked, so why couldn't they just start moving ahead in the world already? Sighing at her own thoughts and realizing how unbelievably self-centered they were, even if she earned the right to be selfish for once in her goddamn existence, Ochako lowered her gaze to the villainess. Miko stared up at her with bloodshot eyes while she appeared emotionally stable, but blinked at the fed-up expression on her face. It was at this moment Ochako decided to be a bitch for once and get something she wanted, because it was one of her few days off from saving the masses from their own stupidity. She was pissed that Zuki wasn't around, but Miko would make do until he got back. Sitting up on the mattress, she glared at Himiko with an aura that enforced the difference in power between them. One that screamed, I'm in charge and you're going to do as I say or else. As she gauged the almost sheepish lowering of her partner's head, the blonde wouldn't make eye contact, and it made Ochako feel, not good, but validated in some way. Grabbing her by the cliff of her chin, she spoke in an overbearing, bullying way that just released all those pent-up emotions. Miko, take your clothes off. The blonde slowly recoiled from the edge in her voice and moved her eyes to meet her savior with a demeanor she had only for her, from only the guilt and fear and worry she could bring her. Why do you inquire? Ochako was in her face with that same glare that made her feel small as the heroine leaned forward slowly, letting the difference in weight become seen as the weightlessness made her feel almost helpless. Himiko almost floated off the bed as the brunette grabbed her by the cheeks, not giving her an inch of space. Because I say so and you're going to do it because I love you and care about you. She brought her closer and kissed her, invading her mouth and slipping a hand down her pants to grope her ass. Now do it, please. Weight returned to the criminal as her lover snapped her fingers and gently pushed her off the mattress. Not sure what else to do, Himiko did as asked and stripped down to her bare skin, only to have Ochako shake her head in disappointment. For once the blonde felt a sudden surge of emotional panic and wanted nothing more than to have Izuku with her again as the woman they both loved shook her head in disapproval. Ochako for her part was not as dismissive as one would think, but seeing Miko nude didn't really do it for her like seeing Zuki naked did. Sure, the woman was beautiful with a figure she was slightly jealous of, but it just wasn't as arousing. But did she even want it right now? Yes? No? Maybe? All the crime fighter knew was that she wanted to vent out her pent-up feelings, and Himiko was the closest receptacle for that. Not wanting to wait for the blonde, she got up and marched over to her, gripping her butt and kissing her again. Looking her over, Ochako pulled a pin from the villainous ratty hairdo and watched the nasty collection of golden locks fall to her ankles, before sticking a finger in her mouth and gently forcing it inside the woman's groin. She watched as Miko's face went wide with shock and how she let out a soft whimper as the muscles bent to the object. Again Ochako kissed her, forcing the more petite woman to bend backwards a bit as she pushed against her. There came a slight tingle from below as Himiko tried to copy her, only to have that hand swatted away by Ochako. The brunette pulled away and glared at her. Slowly she brought her finger out so as to not cause too much pain and grabbed the villainess by the wrist and threw her on the mattress. This wasn't nearly as satisfying as she hoped, but it did soothe some of those held in emotions as Ochako climbed onto the bed. It didn't outright repulse her to be laying with Miko, but if Zuki was here then it would be far better. Part of her just wanted to start yelling and berating at the woman, just because she was there and they trusted each other enough. It wasn't even mainly Himiko she had a problem with right now, it was everything. Her insane work hours as a hero, her parents constantly breathing down her neck, her failed relationship with Katsuki that she put all of her effort into trying to keep alive only to have that crash and burn. Then there was the fact she was driven so fucking low that she had to share her boyfriend with someone else, but at least she enjoyed the arrangement between the three of them. It was just, she behaved so fucking much and was finally getting something she wanted. Even if it wasn't the traditional path she hoped for and there were still fucking roadblocks and obstacles to get to where she wanted. Why did she always have to be the saint? Why couldn't she be a bitch for once? What the fuck could she really do about that? It is what it is, and right now the only way to work it out was in front of her. So she grabbed Himiko by the ankles and dragged her across the bed until her groin was right in her face. Ochako dragged a hand over the top of Himiko's torso, feeling the girl shiver slightly at her touch. Shifting them to the belly and activating her quirk, the heroine flipped her lover around to where her head was now facing her crotch. Holding onto the blonde's hips, she began to bury her mouth into her pussy and work her tongue around the warm, wet interior. As a squeal came the hapless criminal. A sense of resentful pride came from hearing the sounds Himiko made, making Ochako go even harder into pleasuring her. Stupid fucking runt, where the fuck would you be without me? Where would your happiness come from if it wasn't for me risking my neck out for you even though you tried to kill me multiple times? You're a fuck up, a mistake to everyone. Even your own parents and those killers you considered family only tolerated you. The only fucking people who want you around that aren't even worse perverts are me and Zuki. You did all that horrible shit and you still got your happy fucking ending. You get a man to love you despite the fucked up things you're into while I was alone. Bitch, you owe everything to me, and while I love you and consider you as a friend, you and that loser of a boyfriend are mine. I'll take care of you both because I want to, but I'm going to take everything I can from you both until I'm satisfied in life. And quote. Again the selfish side of her brain let itself be known, and this time she didn't fight it. She wanted this so she would take it just like Miko did in her youth. Quickly Ochako wrapped her legs around the girl's upper back and forced her head down by pushing down on her neck. Thankfully Miko was smart enough to take the hint and began to mimic what was being done to her. Pleasure shot up from Ochako's core as she felt Miko's tongue enter her and brought a moan erupting out from her mouth as she began to double down on working her greatest success. It felt good, so she just tried to forget herself in the sensation. There were so many troubles in life, and even if they were petty compared to what happened in the war, she just wanted to feel something good. Wasn't she entitled to this? To have something in her life other than her loneliness? She had saved the world. She had rescued Himiko from herself, so didn't she have claim over this woman, the right to use her and her piddly joys to make all of their lives grander? Besides, who better to take care of Miko than her guardian angel, and Zuki wasn't much better without her around to help manage the blonde. How would they survive without her? They both lived in varying degrees of poverty with next to no social network, no familiar connections. The two of them were dead in the water without her there to lift them out of the muck and show them the heaven they could build together if they just followed her lead. She ceased her inner thoughts when the pleasure spiked to even higher degree and she was brought back to reality as her entire body tensed and then released in a wave of ecstasy that made her moan in delight. It was wonderful, and Ochako found herself clinging to Miko's legs before activating her quirk and spinning the girl around and embracing her. She cuddled up with the blonde, enjoying the warmth and the touch of her skin in the afterglow as a sense of belonging buzzed throughout her being. A smile crossed Ochako's face and she felt happy, but looking down at Miko it was clear something was wrong. The woman had moved her eyes up to the ceiling and had a forlorn sadness about her. I miss Zuzu. And quote. Ochako felt some of her heart squeeze at the longing in her voice. It was honestly adorable and she couldn't help but to just hold on. Miko reciprocated the act and clung to her, causing the heroine to coo and soothe as best she could. They stayed like that for minutes, just taking in the comfort of being in the arms of someone you trust. Then Himiko broke the silence with nothing but melancholy. Shiki, what exactly do you want from this relationship with me and Zuzu? Like, are you just here because it's the most convenient thing you could get? Because, whenever I think about me and Zuzu, I always wonder what would have happened on that bridge if we hadn't spoken. Would I still be alone? Would Zuzu end up with someone else who would just take advantage of him? And quat. She nuzzled a little deeper into the bosom of her savior and kept speaking. I'm grateful to him every day and he gets better as a person every time I see him. But I don't know if I'm doing enough for him or if I'm doing what he needs or even what he wants from me. Because if he just wanted sex then he could go to someone else or just pay for it. But he puts up with my bullshit and loves me. But we don't really know each other. I know his pains and lusts and even his desires in life. But I don't know what he likes, what he's into outside of the bedroom. And quat. She shifted onto her back so all of Ochako's weight was on top of her like a blanket. Then you come in and you're 1,000 times better than me in every regard since you have money, kindness and none of the fucked past or mental problems I have, and it just worries me. Not because I don't trust you, but because I don't know where I stand in his heart anymore. Yeah, I'm a kinky sadistic bitch, but I love that man more than I've loved anyone, and there have been girls in his life that could snatch him up in a second if he wanted them more than me. I'm just so scared of him calling me up one day and saying he doesn't want me anymore, that he found someone else while I'm alone again. And quat. Her voice cracked as tears teased at the edge of her eyelids again. He's all I have, and if he left, I honestly don't know what I'd do. I know I wouldn't hurt him, but there's this hurt part of me that makes him want to stay by my side all the time. I even thought about talking him into moving in, but I didn't because I figured he had a lease on his place and that it might complicate my parole. Yet, I don't even know what I want from him. I mean, he gives me everything I need, but aside from bringing cutting into our sessions, I have no clue what else either of us desire aside from sex. And quat. There came a kiss upon her forehead as Ochako smiled down at her like an angel, making everything seem better as those pure hazel eyes regarded her with love and compassion. Her fingers ran through those golden locks and she spoke with the confidence of a sister. Miko, you just need to talk to him. Sit down with him and have a conversation about what you both want. Yeah, it'll be awkward and even a little painful, but you'll understand him a lot better than just guessing around in the dark and hoping you're doing something right. Heck, I need to have that conversation with you both since even my thoughts are messed up. And quat. Himiko relaxed at her words, finding her touch to be the most reassuring thing at the moment, and still she pursed her lips. Maybe later, cheeky, but he and I need to clear things up before you roll in and start throwing your weight around. And quat. Ochako placed her hand on Himiko's face and kissed her, looking as benevolent as a person possibly can be. Alright Miko, you get to talk to Zuki and then I'll meet you both later on this week to clear the air. However, I want one thing from you, and that is for us to go play table tennis until he gets off from work. Deal? And quat. Himiko grinned and kissed her in return, feeling like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders as she could go face her problems and move forward with her precious Zuzu. Alright cheeky, you got a deal. And quat. Izuku had never wanted a soda so badly in his life. All day he had to handle the insane demands of the yearly rush, and it had left him fiending for something sweet since he didn't get enough time to indulge in anything more than cup noodles. He was already on the train towards Ochako's place and might as well pick up something they could cook. Steak with white rice? Or was that too manly of a dish for their tastes? Maybe he should ask them? He almost didn't want to ask Himiko since she would fight him on it, but he was just sick of fast food. Putting the issue aside, he pulled out his phone as the train kept on going, only to be met by a text from Ochako. Hey Zuki, sorry to not get back with you sooner. Miko asked for some alone time with you, so I'm just gonna stay over at my place by myself tonight. She missed you while you were gone and I needed to sort some paperwork out for my job, so it works out for us all. I wanted to just say I love you and I can't wait to see you and Miko again. And quat. Izuku sighed in disappointment, but smiled. It was so nice to hear someone say they loved him and mean it. Still, he had hoped to see her too, but reality sucks sometimes. Pulling up the response screen, he began to text back. Hey Rosie, it's good to hear from you after so long. I don't mind if Himiko wants some time with me, but is there anything we could do for you in the meanwhile? Maybe we can meet up later? And quat. He hit send and was met by another text moments later. Nope, I'm all good. There's still a boatload of stuff for me to handle, and to tell the truth, Miko wouldn't stop complaining when you left, so let's just wait until my schedule is cleared up again to meet up. But as for that little bloodsucker, can you just hang out with her so she'll calm down? She isn't usually this needy, but she just talked about you again and again. Maybe do something special for her tonight? And quat. A thought came to him as he read that, one that may just make the day just what his darling needed. He replied to the message as quickly as he could when the train pulled into the station. So just to ask, do you have any idea what her favorite dish is? All she's ever had is takeout around me, so I have no clue what she likes. And quat. He waited on a bench for a few minutes before another text came in from the heroine. Miko's always been a carnivore with her diet, so anything beef-based would probably be okay. Though she always liked her meat cooked rare, just to let you know. Aside from that, she has a really big sweet tooth, so maybe throw in something like oranges or apples on the side. I also have this recipe for blood pudding I found online, but I want to wait until we're all together again. Anyway, wish you the best of luck, Zuki. Love you. And quad. That made him feel so much better about what to do tonight. Sending the required love you too, he arose from his seat and began to make his way to see his darling by hopping on another train. An hour later, after getting to the proper station and dropping into a market to purchase the ingredients, Izuku arrived at the door to her apartment with the bag in hand. The entrance swung open and he came face to face with her. He smiled, but Himiko wore a worried expression. It was hard to place, but she certainly wasn't happy or pissed. It was an emotion he had never seen on her, yet she ushered him in and he began to put the groceries away while she continued to stare wordlessly at him. Once that was done, Izuku walked over to her and embraced his darling, hugging and kissing her for all she was worth until she began to push away, much to his mild annoyance. When she was free, Himiko started pacing around the living room, not making eye contact with him before shaking her head and sitting herself on the sofa. Zuzu, I want to talk to you. It isn't about anything bad, but lately I've been wondering a few things about us. Now I love you and I cherish all the time we spent together and all you've been willing to do for me, but I think we need to clear the air about what we want from each other. Because I haven't really been open about what I want, mainly because I don't know what it is, but the same can be said for you. What exactly do you want out of this relationship? ? And quad. Izuku blinked at the statement, finding it oddly absurd as he encroached on his lover by taking a seat on the couch and wrapping his arms around her. What I want is, you, I guess. You're literally one of the best things in my life despite all your strangeness. Himiko, you have no idea how much you really mean to me. And quad. He continued to think for a second as he let his thoughts out. I suppose the thing I want most though is something very long term. Like you always say, we have a life to build together, so I'm serious when I said I wanted to marry you, and so long as you don't fuck any guy other than me, I'll be weird and kinky with you. Yet to be fair, I honestly don't mind if Ochako stays with us since she's been nothing but positive for us both. And quad. Himiko listened and felt her heart skip a beat at that and let own insecurities vent through her words. But what is it you like about me so much, Zuzu? Why do you keep coming back when you could just go to that pink girl or Cheeky or anyone else who would just let you screw? I'm damaged goods and I've been nothing but nasty to you. And quad. There came a dire seriousness about his face as he looked at her. Because I can trust you. Himiko, out of everyone else on this dirtball, I trust you the most because you have earned it. You've been brutally honest with me from the start and helped me see the truth. You confide in me secrets you haven't told anyone else, and I've done the same. You didn't push me away when I confessed to wanting to murder that dick. Instead you were there for me in ways nobody else would be. You aren't a piece of meat to me, Himiko. You're the person I can bear the weight of the world with. And quad. His expression softened a bit and he slid a thumb around her belt line. That being said, I'd love it if you'd let me pop your cherry. And quad. She knew he was just being silly to lighten the mood, but Himiko only climbed harder as she readied to bare her heart. The reason I like you, Zuzu, is because you accept me for who I am. All of me. Not just the weird blonde or the sadist, but as Himiko. You comfort me in my darkest hours and give me such a feeling of pleasure. You make me feel safe and happy, and you have such a strong quality about yourself that nobody else appreciates. To me, you're my treasure, my baby, my everything really. And quad. She paused for a moment as fear came and went from what she was about to say. That being said, I want to be honest about what I want physically from you. Now you don't need to accept, and I'll perfectly understand if you don't want me to do it to you, but this is like the most arousing thing for me. Granted, I can get off just fine with a little biting and slapping, but I've always been the most satisfied when doing this. Zuzu, my biggest desire is to cut you. And quad. Himiko thanked every devil and demon that watched over her that instead of flinching or running like most people would, he simply hummed and shifted himself around on the sofa. Like how so? Because biting and hitting are one thing. That's a whole other realm of interesting. And quad. There wasn't an apt way to describe how relieved Himiko was. He was actually willing to hear her out instead of just running away or changing the subject. Smiling as she cuddled closer, she answered. The biggest thing would be quick, shallow cuts along your chest, your back and maybe your ass. I'd take a knife and put a slight bit of pressure at the tip of the blade so it'd be quick and safe. Really, you would feel more of a jolt, rather a slow drawn out sense of pain. Then I'd suck a little of the blood out before moving to the next one. Once I got properly hot, I'd bite into your sweet spots and you just do your thing until you pop off. And quad. She mused on something brewing in the back of her brain that she spoke out loud. I guess before that I'd need to teach you first aid just to be safe, but it should work. And quad. There were many things Izuku could handle and he was beyond shocked with himself that this was one of them. He never would have imagined he would ever be in a situation where this was discussed, nor did he think it was possible for this to be a thing people did for a sexual thrill. But here he was. The worst thing was that he didn't even have that knee-jerk reaction to the threat of pain that he once had. He was certain his mother would have a heart attack if she heard this conversation, and that Aki would kill someone for trying this shit on him. But this was Himiko, and he loved this woman. Granted, the thought didn't arouse him. Almost the opposite in fact, yet he had kinda learned to like the biting. So maybe cutting wouldn't be that bad? Or maybe she'd make a mistake and send him to an early grave. Who knew? All he wanted was to just fuck. That was it. He was vanilla as can be, save for his slight preference for mutant women. He thought for a moment about how he'd likely have a wife and a family with a woman who didn't want to carve him up like a turkey if he hadn't hesitated that night, but remembered it was done now and that she wasn't coming back. All he had now was Himiko and Ochako, so he may as well compromise. I'd be willing to try that, but maybe after you work me into it? When you cut me with that razor, for example, I couldn't relax as much when you bit or hit me because I had a fear that I might die. It wasn't because of you or because I believed you would try to hurt me like that. It was just instinctual, you know? I prefer the biting since nothing important is in danger and we've done it enough that the fear is gone. And quat. Himiko leaned up and kissed him with a truly relaxed posture about her as tensions in her mind finally started coming undone. That's completely fine. We'll start off small until you get adjusted, then when you do we'll work from there. Is there anything I can do for you? And quat. He pursed his lips as a mix of fear and awkwardness filled him. During or after you're cutting me? And quat. She waved a dismissive hand. Either or. And quat. Izuku thought about it and answered as politely as he could given the mood. First off, you are under no circumstances to put that blade anywhere near my neck or dick. If you do that, I'm never doing this with you again. Secondly, kiss me every so often while you're doing it. I like the reassurance. Thirdly, and I know you'll probably say no to this, but let me fuck you. If I'm willing to let you do that to me, stuff that is likely going to leave scars, then can you at least let me finish inside you? Please? And quat. Himiko pursed her lips this time. He wasn't being unreasonable and one of the requests was downright heartwarming, but there were still a few hurdles before she felt secure enough for that. Maybe you can just do it with cheeky until I'm ready? And quat. There came a red shade to Izuku's face that took her by absolute surprise as he let go of her and marched to the other side of the living room. He shouted for the first time in a long time, and it was directed solely at her. Why the fuck are you so against me taking your virginity? I'm willing to let you cut me and I put up with all your problems even though I love you. But when I ask for this one thing, this one tiny thing that regular couples sort out in the first 3 months without discussing bloodletting in the process, you refuse me so much that you're willing to let me commit adultery by giving my first time to her instead. I don't dislike Ochako, but you're mine, Himiko. I want to give my first time to you because you mean more to me than anyone and you don't seem to fucking understand that! And quat. Color returned to his face as he began to huff and puff to regain his breath while the blonde slowly recovered from her recoiling at his rage. Putting on a more practical face, she addressed him calmly. It isn't that I'm against you taking my first Zuzu, it's just, I need to know we're fully compatible before that, and cutting is my biggest thing. That, and she's been getting very passive aggressive about it, saying she wants you to practice on her before we do it. Cheeky can be a bitch when she wants to be, and eventually she might just use some of that leverage on us, which could put both of us in a bad spot. And quat. Izuku stared at her in disbelief for what had to be minutes before he ran his hands down his face and kept staring. Himiko, I have let you cut me, bite me, slap me and make a massive tear in my relationship with my mother, all because you mean so much to me. I want to be angry, but really I'm a little into the idea of screwing her, but you are mine, so I want you to give it to me so I don't feel like I'm betraying you. And quat. She shook her head and exhaled. Izuku, can you just do it? I'll be with you every step of the way, and after you're done with her then we'll do something special. I just need her appeased because she might decide to hold my parole over my head. I'm not saying she'll send me back to Tartarus, but she can take away a lot of my independence. I could lose my apartment, my job, and be forced into a single housing unit with her where she can keep an eye on me 24/7. Again, Cheeky normally wouldn't do that, but she has threatened it in the past and her emotions are running high right now. And quat. She got off the sofa and clasped his hands tightly. Look, it'll just be like the first time she was here, except you just go all the way, alright? You and I make her feel special, we all feel good, and I don't get put into a housing unit. Okay? And quat. Izuku thought back on it and relented as the memory of how good that night was came back. Shaking his head, he managed to speak with a rapidly dying anger that was being replaced with a strange complacency at the fact he had basically done it once before. I might be willing to plow her, but that'll come later. For now, can you just help me make dinner? And quat. Himiko hesitated for a moment and contemplated the situation. So far Izuku was very receptive to most things they talked about, and they were making progress to where her fantasies might become reality. May as well push the envelope before she loses the nerve. Reaching out, she gently held his hands and looked down at the floor as a lifetime of shame filled her bones. It was always so taboo for her to discuss this with anyone. Even when she joined the league she was ashamed to tell them about it, much less show them. But this was her Zuzu and she needed to have faith in him that he wouldn't run. Before that, would you mind if I showed you my quirk? I know it's kind of sudden, but it'll explain a lot about me. And quote. A childlike excitement washed over Izuku when he heard that, giving off an energy that Himiko had never seen before. It was like seeing a whole other person with how his eyes sparkled at the prospect. Sure, I'd love to. And quote. Himiko could tell he was holding back a whole lot of energy as he stared almost rapturously at in a way he never had before, even when she was pleasuring him. It made her smile a little at the eagerness he had to see one of the parts of herself she loathed the most, but again, she forced past the old shames. She hesitated when the thought to strip came to her. She had never done that in view of anyone when she used her quirk. Even at her worst in those dark places, she always covered herself to hide the shame. But it was only her and her Zuzu, so she was safe to do this. With shaking hands she removed her clothes and reached out to grasp Izuku's right index finger and hold it. She felt so wrong to be doing this, to expose the cause of all her woe in life and the thing people always hated her for. Yet at the same time it was cathartic with how she didn't have to hide that part of herself either. In fact, the more she thought about it, with only the two of them here and how ungodly eager he was, Himiko began to find this rather arousing. Zuzu could keep this a secret just between the two of them, with only Chiki being the only other person who knew. She could be a nasty little monster and he'd love her for it, all her pent-up emotion and passion just for the only one who accepted her completely. Calming herself, Himiko took his index finger and pressed it hard into one of her fangs, drawing a bead of crimson as she pulled it out. She swallowed the drop and took one last look at her baby before she let the warm feeling in her belly spread throughout her body. In an instant the gray protein seeped out from her pores and covered her entirely, swishing around like a liquid before withdrawing into her body, leaving only a top layer which had taken on the adopted DNA, while she felt the tug on her vocal cords deep in her throat that allowed her voice to change. All the while she could see perfectly through the mass of goo, and as she thought, Izuku was totally blown away when he came face to face with an exact copy of himself. Himiko allowed him a few minutes to acclimate to what happened, expecting him to do everything from scream, to cry, to laugh nervously or even leave the apartment. Instead he did the one thing she had not expected and gave one of the biggest smiles she had ever seen on a person. Holy shit, that's incredible. Did you manage to do that with just one drop of blood? Why did all that goop come out from your belly first? Is that where your quirk factor is? How long can you stay like this? Is it dependent on how much blood you drink, or is it just there until you turn it off? How can you turn it off? Are you as strong as me now, or does it not copy muscle mass? How did you copy my clothes? What about in quad? He was touching her while speaking and his tone was reaching a fever pitch as the questions just sped up and up, while Himiko was now the one winded and bewildered by her lover's actions. Gently grabbing him by the wrist she uttered out a few words to get him to stop as she tried to put on her most friendly face. Zuzu, that's enough with the questions for right now. I can't answer all that one after the other, so can you just relax? And quote. The quirkless man's amazement only grew when she spoke, grabbing her by the face like she was the most interesting thing on the planet. You can even copy the person's voice. Himiko, that's beyond astounding. Why don't you use this more? And quote. The shapeshifter pursed her lips and removed his hands from her face while feeling a strange sense of comfort at being in his presence as her most vulnerable and disgusting self. They had already come so far in the span of an hour. Go for broke, otherwise you may not get this chance again. There was more hesitation in her than ever before, but her faith in him won out with her hope for something worth living for. Because, Zuzu, do you remember when I told you how a quirk like mine can have severe mental issues attached to it? About how a quirk like mine can really fuck you over and how I'm a level 8 on the Lindsay scale? And quote. He nodded with that energetic, excited and eager to learn aura still radiating strong as he stared at her like she was made of gold. Yeah, what of it? And quote. There came the biggest pause of her life as her lungs flattened and all of her sins, all the corpses and blood flashed before her eyes, cursing her beyond the grave for what she had done to them. Then she saw her baby stare at her with those adoring eyes and that smile he had reserved only for her and her alone. Take the plunge or never know. She shut her eyes. All my life I've been drawn to blood. The first time I had it was at the age of 4 when I saw a dead bird laying on my parents' patio and I just had this urge to drink the fluid. Except my parents were horrified by my quirk when it was revealed, so they took me to a therapy center that specialized in repressing the emergence of undesirable quirks. So for the first half of my life I had no idea how to handle that craving in the back of my gut that just told me to bite into animals and people. I repressed it so much that it became way worse, and eventually it became very wild and started to develop a psychosis where it'd just take over me. Which ended in me stabbing one of my classmates in the arm so I could drink his blood and then going on the run. And quote. She shook her head in dismay at the memories. From there I just started hunting people to feed. Men, women, teenagers, it didn't matter. I was just following my instincts and enjoying what I did, and I ended up taking 20 people who hadn't done anything wrong other than attract my eye. I'm not gonna lie and say I didn't know what I was doing was bad, but when that thirst just struck me, it was all that mattered, and if I went for more than a month without feeding, then I'd start going nuts and stop thinking like a person. And quote. There was an undeniable shame in her heart as she admitted to one half of her darkest secret. The other half she was just unwilling to explain what she did to those poor people, since even Zuzu was bound to have his limits, especially with what she suggested they start trying. The last thing she wanted was for him to think he was anywhere near the level of those scum who played with her heart. But to her utter relief, he merely came forward and hugged her. It was warm and full of sympathy and love as he held onto the fake skin like she might disappear, something she had no idea she needed so badly at her most shameful. That's fine, Himiko. You needed help and nobody was there for you until Ochako found you, but I'm here for you. Whatever you need, I'll be there. You understand me? ? And quote. A smile crawled across her face. They were so close now. All that was left was the other half of her secret, her involvement with the PLA and easing him into her tastes more. Although at the moment she almost didn't care. He accepted her even after learning most of her darkest secret and was even reassuring her. If there was ever a go-to sign to spread her legs and finally give herself to someone who truly loved her, it was now. But right as she thought that, there came a chill to her skin as the covering encasing her body began to slowly detach from her pores. Without a word she rushed into the bathroom and threw herself into the tub as she couldn't keep the form together any longer, and the protein compound made of her cells and some mystery substance even the old doc couldn't figure out, slid off her body and onto the ceramic. As always, she hated the sensation when the goop left her skin, but it wasn't that big of a deal. Just drink a few blood packs and you'll be right as rain. Except she hadn't expected Izuku to follow after her like some guard dog. Then he proceeded to squat down at the edge of the tub, put his hand inside and grab a light handful of the slime and taste it. Of all the creepy, nasty, rude things she had seen him do, this had to take the cake so far as she just watched him actually hum in surprise and grab another handful. Dude! And quote. He turned his head towards her, looking mildly perplexed. Yes? And quote. She still carried her shock at what he was doing. Don't eat that! And quote. He raised an eyebrow as he began to chew on the bit already in his mouth before swallowing. Why? If it comes from your body like it has, then it essentially is nothing but the equivalent of stem cells, given how you can change your appearance so much. Besides, it doesn't taste half bad, like a sweaty protein shake. And quote. She then proceeded to throw a loofah at the man she loves above all else. Well, don't fucking eat it like some fucking weirdo. It's fucking nasty! And quote. He smirked and took a step in the tub only to agitate her more with open arms. Isn't that the pot calling the kettle black since you talked about wanting to cut me for a thrill? We're both freaks here, darling. Best get used to it. And quote. He wrapped a hand around her slightly moist hair and kissed her deeply before Himiko half-heartedly pushed him away. Just go get dinner started. I'll be there in a few minutes after I drink a couple blood packs. And quote. Izuku smiled and gave another kiss as he looked at her with nothing but love and worship that made her heart skip a beat. That's my girl. And quote. Izuku stepped out of the tub and made his way to the kitchen, leaving Himiko alone in the restroom as she began to shed a few tears and profoundly thank Jin and all the others for having her stop and talk to him on that bridge, because that was the best choice she ever made. There wasn't a time in Ochako's life when she was so happy to be looking up rental prices. She saw a nice little villa by the sea with a beach and a private pub and a pretty decent nightlife scene, all while being well within her spending budget. It was perfect for what she wanted, just the three of them alone on a nice trip for a week while they hopefully close that gap. Or if that isn't possible to get Zuki and Miko to act like rabbits in a dark room, then they could just have a fun time with each other. Briefly she thought back to Momo's baccariate party and all the joy they had. It was literally the most extravagant event she had seen, with a mountain of wealth being burned for the enjoyment of it. $2,000 wine bottles, a $50,000 banquet with the finest food she ever tasted and more. But Ochako couldn't stop blushing at how drunk Momo got and tried to go find Shoto, only to call him up and declare her love for him while her clothes were stained purple with wine while Mina hugged her as she cried joyful tears. It was hard to believe that was 4 years ago and the two were already working on their first kid. Which raised a question of what monstrous quirk that child would have, since both of the parents had near god-level quirks. Hell, Momo could literally make money come from her tits if she wanted, and Shoto can freeze or burn everything in a 5-mile radius with just a thought. Maybe it'd have the ability to make armies of elemental dolls to fight with? Pushing the idea away, Ochako started to ponder what she could do in the meantime. Miko had an easy enough job, but Zuki was a different story since he had a typical 9 to 5. She considered just bringing up the idea of her taking care of him as her little boy toy, but realized how weird that sounded in her head. Besides, Himiko might throw a fit and Izuku had some pride about himself, so just moving in with her so that she could have a living relief valve on hand wouldn't slide well. She contemplated calling him just to see how he was doing, especially after Miko had her talk with him. It likely had gone well judging by how they interacted over more dangerous stuff, but curiosity and loneliness stuck to her, and she also wanted him to come over since she was alone tonight in her home. Maybe she could make some cinnamon rolls and hot cocoa for them and they talk about stupid stuff. She liked that idea. Izuku did have a warm, innocent presence to him and it would be pretty nice to just relax in her slippers and robe with a belly full of sweets while that sweet guy cuddled up to her. A twinge of jealousy erupted when she recalled how often Izuku would cling to Himiko and how that woman would just drown in his love. She knew it was right since they've been together longer than she had with either of them. But she wanted that. She wanted Izuku's eyes to explode in joy when they met and for him to scoop her up like it was her last day on earth and kiss the air out of her lungs. She wanted to be suffocated by his affection just like Himiko was, even if the blonde had earned it far more than she had. Sure, she could invite Miko over as well, but right now she just wanted time with him and not even in an intimate way. She just wanted him to share in the silence of her home. Well, it was Saturday and Miko had been here yesterday so he should be free. Reaching for her phone by her desk, Ochako pulled up his number, only to have another number instantly ring and take over her screen. She paused for a moment as a wave of emotions came over her that washed away all her warmth and replaced it with that savior urge of the heroine as she saw Katsuki's name pull up. There were so many questions and emotions that came with seeing just that simple name, but she was still a rabbity so that obligation to her fellows was still there, even if she wanted nothing more than to let it ring out and vanish so she could call up the guy who didn't carry a lifetime of emotional baggage for her. Answering the call, she put the phone to her ear and gave her best voice. "Hey Katsuki, everything okay?" And quad. The number one pro had a voice that sounded almost childlike in his joy as he spoke. It was a tone that she hadn't heard from him in years, the last time being from before their ambush at the USJ so long ago. "Hey Roundface, sorry I haven't called as much, work's been a bitch like always. Anyway, I haven't heard much from you so I thought I'd check in. And quad. Ochako withheld a sigh as countless nights of comforting this poor man and defending him against their classmates and coworkers came back like a smack in the face. There was a part of her that still loved the man, but any romantic intention that lingered had turned to ash even as the memories of their young romance flickered in her mind and brought a sensation of heartbreak that still bore fresh pain. Quickly she grew numb to it and gave an even tone as she tried to flush the times away. I'm fine. Same old with me. Anything new with you? And quad. Again came the childish sound of excitement and joy which was so unusual for such an explosive and wrathful man as him. But it was still better than his episodes of rage or unfeeling depression. "Yeah, actually I've been hanging out with Deku again after half a decade so I've had a lot of good stuff going on. Of course it could have started on better footing since his mom reached out to me since he's in a weird-ass relationship with some blood-sucking bitch, but other than that it's been like old times with us. Granted work takes a good chunk of time for everyone so we can't hang out as much as I'd like, but we make do. Hell, last night he and a few other scrubs from our class went with me to a party. And quad. Ochako wasn't sure if that should worry her or not since Katsuki was always so vague about whoever this Deku person is. Then to add to that he was unnaturally happy, manic almost if she went by the tone of his voice. She needed to dig more. "Really? That's interesting. What exactly do you two mainly talk about? You never said much about him for years." And quad. Glee flourished through his voice and it sounded akin to those moments where he'd gush about All Might with such reverence that it was actually adorable when compared to his usual pig-headedness. With him we mainly talk about life and try to catch up since it's been years. Mostly it's about relationships and that sort of bullshit. Honestly, I'm a little surprised that he hasn't asked about the stuff I do as a hero since I'd figured he would love to hear about it, being quirkless like he is, but being an adult can be fucking exhausting so what can you do? Anyway round face, would you mind if I ask you something a little touchy? And quad. She raised an eyebrow at the sudden shift to his tone and noted a strong hint of guilt in his voice that caused it to drop like a rock. Depends on what it is. You're not in any trouble are you Katsuki? And quad. There was an honest concern in her response and just as certain was the reassurance in his as they redid a dance they had made ever since that time he saved her from the 0-pointer years ago. Nope, nothing like that, I just. Inhale, I know we've been broken up for 4 years now ever since I had that one meltdown, which is fine, I was out of control and you kept getting worse because of it so we had to do what was best for us both. That being said, are you seeing anyone right now? And quad. The guilt grew to a climax in that last part and she could read him like a book which stirred a mix of relief and long-held resentment over the fact. He was supposed to be hers to fix and she couldn't do that. She failed him so now any bimbo with fat tits, a mini skirt and a few ego-stroking words can just waltz in and take advantage of him? What about the others? What about this Deku guy? Weren't they keeping an eye on Katsuki to make sure he wasn't being abused? No. She had to let go now, didn't she? He was beyond her help now and she had a whole new future with new people to cherish and repair so her happy future could be shared with those that truly loved her. Besides, it wasn't his fault that his quirk made him infertile so it was best she remained removed from those old thoughts for her sake and everyone else's. I'm assuming you're a ? And quad. There came that obvious sign of his shame, just like those times she caught him sneaking cookies or jacking off to porn when she had a long shift. He was still that innocent, guideless time bomb of a person who had those rare moments of humility and humbleness. God damn it, yes. For someone's in fact, it was just a one-night thing from that party the guys took me to, and I've just been feeling like an asshole because of it since I don't really know how you and Quat. She raised a hand out of habit despite him not being anywhere to actually see her do it, and grafted a soft, yet firm manner to the soul. Katsuki, you've said it yourself, we've been divorced for almost 5 years. You're allowed to date again, so don't think you're being unfaithful or anything. I've moved on as best I can and you have to do the same. Find someone who can do what I couldn't for you and be happy. After all you suffered, nobody deserves to live a joyful life more than you, so just do what you want, okay? And Quat. A genuine sigh of relief came from the speaker as the sound of popping cartilage echoed out as he surely was cracking his knuckles like always. That's good. At least I can use that as an excuse to rope Deku into more bullshit. It's just, am I a dick for being mad at the guy all the fucking time for ignoring me? Like he has his own life to live and he at least tries to make time for me, but I just get so fucking angry when he can't hang out that my quirk starts acting out. I mean, this is literally the 10th phone I've bought in a year since I keep blowing them up. And Quat. The explosion user went on as his temper started to rise and he began to rant with months of unyielding passion, fury and resentment powering his lungs. I honestly don't know what the fuck is so wrong with me that he refuses to make any time for us unless I bother him about it or somebody else asks him to bring me along. But he always makes time for that creepy whore of his who does God knows what to him, and I'm left by myself with nobody to hang out with. Sure, I may have dropped all contact with him when high school rolled around, but that was on commission orders since Shigaraki was still around. Plus the fucker had somehow pulled triple cram school after the first year of middle school and managed to just skip the 8th grade altogether, leaving me all alone. And Quat. There came a loud pop from his empty hand as he got louder and more violent in his tone. Didn't he have any idea how that affected me even back then? Yeah, I may have given him a lot of tough love, but it wasn't like Annie was gonna help him man the fuck up. I had to suffer that entire last year of middle school without him, and I know it's ancient shit, but I can't get over how bad it felt to not have him there for the first time in my life. I'd known the guy since before we could talk, and I found out at the start of next year that he had moved on, that he had abandoned me and gone off somewhere I had no clue about. And Quat. More explosions. The power of firecrackers echoed from the speaker as his emotions got slightly unhinged. That hurt me so fucking much. Then UA rolled around and that was such a clusterfuck. Ever since that attack on the USJ and Shigaraki fucking stalking so much, I still remember finding that severed head in my desk a week later with that note. I was so fucking scared that I was gonna die at any moment. I couldn't fucking sleep unless you were there, and I kept expecting that bastard to appear out of a portal at random, or that shapeshifting bitch to sneak in and take me without anyone noticing, or a horde of Nomas to descend from the skies. And Quat. A groan of pain came as a crack came into his voice as old trauma resurfaced in full. Deku was all I had to keep me going. He was my best friend ever since we were born, and he always believed in me. He always had my back regardless of how much of a dick I was. But I couldn't see him, even when that bastard teleported into my room and drugged me, offering me a place in his group, or after he came back when Kamino was over and killed my dad. All I wanted was to just talk to Deku again, to hear him say everything was alright and that I could still be like All Might, but I just never could because of that monster. And Quat. A snap came from the speaker as he struggled to regain some control of himself. Now I've killed the damn fucker and all his little followers, so there's no reason Deku can't hang out with me like when we were kids, but I understand why he isn't. But there's this jealous part of me that wants race over to whatever bitch he's seeing and pay her however much to fuck off. I seriously have enough money to have the guy set for life, and I could build him a whole 3-story house with all the food and stuff he could want, but I haven't fucking asked him because he hasn't given me the chance. I owe him goddamn everything for helping me get through that hell. Even when I faced that devil, I could feel him cheering me on and telling me to win. That's why I never gave up, and now that he won't let me repay him, I feel so damn shitty and pissed off. I mean, what exactly am I doing wrong here when all I want is my friend back? Am I an asshole for wanting that? And Quat. There was a lot to unpack in those statements. Most she already knew about. Ochako still recoiled at the memory of when Katsuki opened his desk and screamed at the sight of that gore-splattered head. She could even recall how horrible it smelled when they walked into the classroom. But the past aside, he wasn't overtly monstrous in what he wanted. It sounded more like his old scars were getting in the way of his healing. Shrugging, she readjusted the phone and spoke as bluntly as possible. No, but you're taking every chance to sound like one. Look, Katsuki, you're only making this more complicated than it needs to be. I get this guy means a lot to you. Hell, we all know that, but it isn't like you need to seduce him or bribe him with money just to spend some time with him. Call him up tonight and ask to go somewhere tomorrow. If he can, then great. If not, then act like an adult and let him do his thing, and maybe contact him again in another day. Though, I'd suggest not bringing up buying him a house until you guys get comfortable enough, and I'd wait 5 months before that. Alright? And Quat. A few seconds passed in silence from either end of the line. Yet soon after the top hero had a far more relaxed aura about him, and adding to it was the serenity of his voice, like he had seen what had to be done. Thanks, I needed to hear that. And quat. Ochako smiled at the answer, proud that she had helped someone so dear to her in some way. In fact, she felt almost a little smug at how easily she managed to fix his problem like a heroine should. Anytime, boom boy, just promise me you'll let me know if you ever need any help and maybe introduce me to Mr. Deku sometime. And quat. A laugh snuck out of the phone that was undeniably warm when he finally settled into a better state of mind. Sure cheeks, I'll be sure to keep in touch. Anyway, I'm gonna go since I have a field trip to plan, so talk to you later. And quat. With that he ended the call and granted the anti-gravity user her peace once more as she returned her attention to the computer screen where pictures of a budget paradise were pictured. It was all she could hope for, and with those two beside her she couldn't wait. Still, she wanted to dial up Izuku and hog his attention for herself, the idea of those cinnamon rolls sounding better by the moment. Yet she wouldn't get the chance as a message from the commission popped up on her monitor and detailed how her latest arrest records needed to be turned in before next week, along with another email demanding her evaluation on Miko and if she should continue with her parole or be revoked from the rehabilitation program entirely. Sighing at the requirements of her career, she opened her mobile and shot both Himiko and Izuku a text saying she wasn't free tonight. With that done and seeing it go to read and even getting a good night, you can do it from Izuku, Ochako began to type away and push her own desires away as the duties of a hero called once again. She only hoped that they could share in the perfect day she was preparing for them both. Himiko screamed as she felt her windpipe constrict and her legs flare out from the sofa as more weight was shifted to her side. He was mounting her now and she gave a few slaps to his bare chest which were plainly ignored. The skin on her cheeks puckered and wept as he sucked and grabbed, his free hand doing everything to tickle her soft spots. The woman thrashed and screamed some more at the rough attention of her lover, laughing all the while as he continued to play with her in some parody of innocence. It wasn't a lustful thing that he was trying to do. There was no passion behind his acts or desire that marked some of their night together. In fact, it was ruled by a playfulness as the quirkless man grabbed and kissed and tickled and loved while his darling pushed and squirmed and slapped and kicked in response. She was grinning like a contented youth at feigning her disapproval and giving token resistance as they rolled and wrestled with not a care in the world. Soon she had moved her body weight to the edge of the couch and fell to the floor with a hard thump while giggling and covering her blushing face when Izuku descended and was half-heartedly working past her slaps. He laughed and tugged at her thighs and shoulders, stealing a kiss here and there on any mark of skin he could steal. Again his fingers snaked to her soft spots and wiggled around the sweat-slick patches of her neck, causing the blonde to erupt into more laughter as she convulsed as if in the height of a seizure. Izuku would never admit to it unless he was in a rather loving mood, but hearing her laugh was something he absolutely cherished. It was one of the closest things to angelic he had heard on this earth, and to be able to force such a heavenly sound from the woman who meant everything to him made him fiend after it like an addict. To see the look of such joy and know he was the one to give it, that he alone was the person who made her happy, caused such pride in him that he could hardly put words to it. Again he placed his lips here and there, blowing raspberries on the more flabby bit of her body, tugging and pushing against her struggles to get free as gently as he could. It was all so precious to him, and he felt his love for her grow even more as she grabbed and slapped him. Himiko had tried to get up on her knees, only for Izuku to grip her by the crease of her legs and the rim of her breasts as he brought her back to the couch in an ironclad hold that she laughed and kicked wildly in. She was pushed to the cushions and he set his body on her, causing her to twist and slap at his face with a smile. A hand was placed through her hair and her head was slammed sideways on the headrest as Izuku began to tickle her exposed neck like a bandit while he kissed the other, retreating side. Breathing became difficult as her lungs were squeezed by laughter and her face was becoming a cherry red, so left with no other options that weren't inappropriately violent, she slapped her palm on the sofa and shouted, "Pineapple! Pineapple!" As her last bits of willpower vanished, Izuku pulled away and let her catch her breath, but he still ran a hand over her right arm to simply keep contact as she was recovering. Her golden eyes stared up at him mirthfully as she was huffing and puffing her way back to stability, which proved to be pointless since the moment she was able to sit up, Izuku accosted her with an air-stopping hug that squeezed her down to the ribs. A groan of mild pain left her mouth, but she smiled all the same when he planted more kisses on her. They coiled and wiggled like worms that burrowed deeper into the leather until a mutual position arrived and Izuku let off some of the pressure around her torso. It still stuck them together like glue, but neither had much to complain about. Soon they laid there in silence, listening only to their breathing and the rhythm of their heartbeat on the sofa, and Himiko couldn't help feeling like the happiest girl in the world at that moment. She even felt her heart skip a beat when she saw her baby drifting off to sleep as he lay next to her. Yet for some reason that got her more than a little upset. Sure, it was petty and childish, but he'd only been here for 3 hours and there was more she wanted to do with him. Besides, she wanted to, fuck it. Turning around to face him, Himiko pulled herself up and kissed him with all the passion she had. He blinked at the sudden interaction, but having a pair of hands dig into the pressure points on the underside of his jaw woke him up without a doubt. The villainess stared at him with that playful, domineering gaze that made him clam up, but he still put his hands on her hips when she pulled away. Fangs the size of digits greeted him as she gave a mischievous, powerful smile and slowly made the both of them sit up. There was a fearful, yet adoring light to his eyes while they stared at each other that made her ooze with delight. Pressing her thumbs into the slots on the underside of the very end of his jaw, Himiko allowed a sense of joy to pump through her as pain registered on his face before she dragged her hands downward to his hips. She wasn't in a particularly frisky mood, but it was always good to play with her Zuzu a bit. Gently she pushed him off the sofa, making him stand with an adorable wanting sadness just flooding his eyes that drove her more than a little wild at how sweet and cute he looked. But still he owned her a little and she wanted something. So she reclined into the seat and made herself comfortable. "Strip for me. And quat." It was a statement which took him more than a little off guard, so much so that Izuku stood dumbfounded for a second. Then came a nice heat to his eyes that made Himiko practically sparkle at seeing it. He took a step towards her with a hardly suppressed urge that filled the air between them as he nearly reached out a hand to grab her. "Can you do the same for me, please?" and quat. She grinned and slipped her bra off from under her shirt as a certain smugness filled her brain at the power she held over such a wonderful man. "Of course, but it's rude to keep a lady waiting." And quat. Not needing another word, Izuku removed his shirt and pants as quickly as possible with nothing but the need to expose himself to her running wild in his veins. Himiko gave a satisfied grin at what she saw, finding it more alluring each time at how badly he wanted her. Even if there wasn't a large flag standing up between his legs a few feet away to signal that, she swore she could literally smell the one on him. Not to disappoint, she did likewise and effortlessly dropped her sweatpants and oversized t-shirt to reveal herself to him. With it came an overwhelming whisper of freedom and security at showing herself to him, that even at the most vulnerable this man would keep her safe and she could trust him enough to give her body. He went towards her with a wild, frenzied heart and it amused her to no end to see him so fueled by desire. A smile crossed her face as she stepped to him, letting Izuku embrace her and run his hands over her skin. Normally she would have teased him a bit by making him work for it before giving in or playing a little game beforehand, but she wasn't in the mood to put so much effort into it. Himiko winced slightly as he dug his fingers into her rear, but she let him have his way for now as she grabbed his chin and kissed him deeply, allowing him to get swept up in the passion he had for her. Slowly she made her way to the bathroom with Izuku in tow and turned a light on as they entered. Stepping from the most important person in her life, she gestured to the shower with a finger. "Get in, I'll take care of you." And quat. To her surprise, Izuku paused and raised an eyebrow. Hesitation battled with his desire and some sense came back to him as he put a hand over the place where she first cut him. "We're not going to be doing anything rough, are we?" And quat. Himiko rolled her eyes at him and entered the tub with an expectant glare that had a soft authority to it. "No Zuzu, I'm not really in the mood at all, but I know you're always ready to go like a goddamn ape, so I'm getting this out of the way so you don't try to hump me halfway through the night. Now come here." And quat. He studied her expression and reluctantly entered alongside her, waiting for her to make the first move with more than a small amount of apprehension that showed. Not one for subtlety or waiting around over silly things, Himiko wrapped her fingers around his shaft like it owed her money and brought his lips to her as they began to kiss again. Izuku took the message and shifted his hands all over the supple skin of her body, resting them firmly on her rear and digging them in as Himiko moved her mouth to the nape of his neck and began to suck on the spot above his jugular. A finger entered her slit as Izuku sought to give the same pleasure he was receiving, but it was right at that moment when he knew he was done. Euphoria rushed to his head as he let out a moan, feeling the weight of all his troubles drift away for half a heartbeat before he was left panting. Without a word he grabbed her shoulders and pulled her into a kiss that matched the intensity of his heart rate, forcing her against the tile wall with the sole purpose of loving her. Himiko put up no fight to his affection, letting him have his way since it was particularly adorable as he kept giving her that worshipping gaze that struck a chord in her soul. Eventually, after a minute of his attention, she pushed him away with a laugh as he struggled to hug her again like some overly needy baby. There was that sweet puppy dog look in his eyes that she loved to see, but without waiting on her love and compassion for this angel of a man, she turned on the showerhead after taking the curtain wall forward. A blast of ice-cold water rushed overhead, narrowly missing her and landing right where Izuku was standing, which resulted in the funniest thing she had seen since that time Jin had somehow gotten a pie smashed into his face during that one fight at the circus. Curses aplenty erupted out from her lover and he began to frantically move out of the way before jumping out of the bathtub with water dripping off every inch of his body. He twisted and turned as he shivered, all the while saying "fuck, that's cold" over and over as Himiko laughed her ass off before cutting the water. She opened the curtains and smiled evilly at Izuku, who glared daggers right back with a towel in hand that banished most of the chill. "That was a dick move." And quat. Himiko had another giggle at his expense and stepped from the tub, latching herself to his torso with a cocky grin. She knew he wouldn't stay mad and was proven right as he rolled his eyes and left the room with her in tow. They landed on the sofa minutes later, and to Himiko's eternal delight, Izuku still had a grumpy face about him that made her want to squeal. With speed she rose from the couch, electing a mild look of displeasure from Izuku, and retreated to her room where she grabbed her comforter. Izuku glared a get over here type of ire that made Himiko glad as she emerged from her room and threw the comforter towards the sofa. Taking a double skip to the kitchen, she opened her cabinets, bringing out a few bags of candy, and turned to rummage around the fridge in order to grab a fresh case of whatever energy drink she had in stock. Setting the treats on the coffee table in front of the couch, the blonde burrowed under the blanket and popped up directly beside him. Izuku let out a grunt as she squeezed herself to him, constricting his ribs with the force of a joyful snake. Despite the slight pain, he reached out an arm and hooked it around her belly, holding her just as tightly under the pleasant warmth of the blanket. Again he smiled and planted a few pecks on her lips while they shifted to find the best position when Himiko returned his adoration, snuggling up to his side as best she was able. The touch of his scars on her bare flesh was coarse and grainy, that was matched by the smooth texture of the undamaged skin. It wasn't quite arousing at the moment, though she did find it and the way he was looking at her to be ungodly attractive. The more correct term to put it was comforting, as she felt his muscles tighten around her petite frame, and the sensation of his weight and breath banished whatever could have bothered her in solitude. It created a surge of safety and relaxation that was old and deep in her brain, one which grew the more they clung to each other. A grin covered her lips as he stroked her side tenderly with a lifetime's worth of affection that not so long ago she would have killed to get. Thinking back on it, she had killed to obtain such things before. She never wanted it to end as Izuku held her in the warmth of embrace. Here was where she was happiest, in the privacy of their home, away from anyone or anything that could bother them. A tingle climbed up her spine as he lifted her and set her down on his lap, reclining on the armrest while she lingered on top of him. More and more sensations of touch came when Izuku continued to pepper her neck and grope at her belly and breasts in soothing, gentle motions, while he doubtlessly was attempting to lose himself in the emotions of the moment, which Himiko couldn't agree more with. She saw that he was starting to drift off again, so with a little gusto the woman flipped herself over on his torso, bringing them both eye to eye as he kept touching her with all the reverence of a master musician practicing with their instrument. She nuzzled on his neck, kissing and suckling just because she could, and broke the pleasant silence. "So Zuzu, what did you feel like doing? We have the whole night ahead of us and Chiki has her own stuff to do, meaning it's just us tonight. I was thinking maybe we can watch a few movies to pass the time. And quat." Izuku regarded her with a shrug as he dug his cheeks against her much like how a dog would, holding her close all the while and shifting around so they faced the television. A few strokes of her arms later he spoke up. "What do you want to watch? And quat." Himiko gave a smile and grabbed the remote for her streaming box, pulling up thousands of films that could last a literal lifetime. Tapping a button she brought up her favorites, which were obscure B films that had Ed Wood's name aplenty, the classic Hammer monster films along with the original Universal versions from way back, a couple modern horror films that were close to grindhouse levels of gore but with more style, and a boatload of forgettable rom-coms she had been into since her teens. Briefly she paused and looked back at her lover with a curious gaze. Maybe she could learn something about him for once. "What do you want to watch? And quat." Izuku thought on it for a minute as he squeezed his lover and remembered an old movie he had seen once as a child that stuck with him for some reason. "Could you pull up The Shadow? It's an old hero movie from the 1990s. And quat." Himiko raised an eyebrow at his choice, since it was one film she had never heard of, but judging by the title it was likely more of a guy thing anyway. Soon she pulled it up, which had the cover art of a guy with a beak-like nose peeking over a red scarf and holding two 1911 handguns. The start was basic enough with that kind of premise of get the bad guy, which meant she could tell right away how the plot would go. Needless to say it bored her, and it was easy to see why Izuku enjoyed it, since the whole energy of the movie was a juvenile escapist fantasy that anyone with a dick could find interesting. But thankfully Izuku wasn't completely focused on the TV and rather fiddled with her hair, which gave her room to talk. "You know, when I was a kid I loved movies. They were always so interesting and had so many pretty people that I used to pretend to be in the films. I would even snag my mom's old dresses that she threw away and pretend I had the leading role in Casablanca or whatever. Hell, I wanted to be an actress before I went nuts, since they got paid and loved for pretending to be other people. But life didn't turn out that way. And quat." Izuku shrugged again and dug his fingers into the skin of her arms, reaffirming her as best he could with his touch. "That's how life is sometimes, but like you said, it could be worse. I'm here with you at least, and you're a published author, so you got to live your dream in a way, just like me and my hero one. And quat." Himiko mused on it and reclined into his arms, simply glad to be held and anchored to something good. "Yeah, but do you ever have times where you think it's more trouble than it's worth? The life you're living with me? And quat." She winced in pain as his fingers gripped her arms and forced her to look up at the complex anger buying in his eyes that honestly scared her when she saw so much fury in such a gentle man. It was cold and resolute, like a sword descending on a neck that gave no room for argument. "Don't you ever ask something like that again. My place is here with you wherever you go, and nothing will ever change that." Himiko, I love you. More than base words can surmise, and I'd sooner die than have anyone or anything take you away from me. We have a future together, we have joy in each other, and you let me love you completely, and I'd be willing to die for that. Don't ever forget that because you're worth any hardship to me. Understand? And quat. Instantly Himiko avoided his gaze out of shame for letting her stupid insecurities rule her, but they still ushered out another question as she pulled herself to him like someone was going to steal him. But you mean to tell me that with all the other options you have with Chiki and Ashido and any other woman on the street who isn't as fucked up as me, you would never in your entire life rather end up with another person? That you don't regret being with me? And quat. He gave a scoff as he pushed her back across the cushions to make her look him in the face. Again that adoration flamed strongly, enough that Himiko felt completely dominated by it as she laid there helpless without resorting to violence, as stared at her with such loving passion. So long as you remain loyal, then I'll never regret being with you. Even with all the shady shit you did in the past, I still love you because you make my life worth living. You have no idea how much you mean to me, Himiko, you really don't. And quat. She gazed up at him, wrapping her arms around his torso and content as that surge of abandonment fears left her under the intense, loving gaze of her lover. Yet she asked again just to be sure. So you mean to tell me there's never been a woman you loved more than me? And quat. Izuku opened his jaw to preach that very thing, but to Himiko's dreadful surprise the flames of passion lessened and died out as he became lost in thought. She clung to him for 10 whole minutes as he just hovered over her, staring at a square of fabric as whatever was in his head danced. But eventually his eyes moved to acknowledge her and he gave an earnest smile. Maybe, but that was a long time ago before the calamity happened. I have you and Ochako now, and that's all I need. Now can you stop being so worried? You're the one I want and nothing will change that. And quat. There came a rapid, uneven beat in her chest. It was suddenly hard to breathe and it felt like someone put a spike through her abdomen as she found herself struggling to bring in air. Was she having a heart attack? She clawed at the center of her chest and stood up from the sofa as the room began to spin slightly. Everything felt distant and cold, making her feel infinitely worse as she fought to keep calm. There wasn't a time she felt so horrible. Even when Jin and the others died, there was that surge of primal anger that let her feel somewhat in control, but now it was like she had been placed into the whims of the empty world again. She wanted to throw up, scream and cry all at the same time, but the only thing could do was shake as the anxiety and endless streams of horrible visions and the possibility of being stuck in this shitty place by herself again attacked her. It was a whisper from hell and it latched deep into every strand of guilt and worthlessness she had, every sin she ever committed, telling her she deserved to be alone and that no one would ever love her again. Then there came a touch to her torso that coiled just below her breasts and brought a wave of great, holy warmth to her wretched soul. She felt a lips press into her cheek and fingers wiping away tears she hadn't known she shed in her terror, all the while his heavenly voice, so strong, so loving, so indescribably wonderful, caressed into her ear with a force of kiss, saying, "It's all right, I'm right here and nothing will ever change that. I love you, Himiko, never forget that." And quat. She leaned into his body, feeling his compact muscles and touched skin greet her like the best security blanket anyone could have, and ceased to cry as she hooked around his body like a chain. She felt him pick her up and heard the hinges to her bedroom squeal before meeting the softness of her mattress, but not once did she think of letting go or looking up. There was a hand caressing her back and that amazing voice of the man she couldn't live without anymore talking to her so sweetly that it made her cry a little as he talked. "I think I should get the comforter. Do you want me to do that?" And quat. She shook her head and put even more pressure on her arms to keep him there with her. The words were small and mousy, something she rarely had, but with him she knew it was okay to be that vulnerable. "No, can you just stay here with me?" And quat. He returned the hold and guided his hands to rest right on her chest with that reaffirming love glowing in those jewel-like eyes. "Of course I can. Do you want me to do what I did last time?" And quat. Himiko nodded and was greeted by the comforting sensation of a warm suckling on her breasts. It brought a certain calmness to the world as she laid her hands through his hair, knowing he wouldn't leave. She never wanted him to be away from her, not now, not a week from now or ever again. He was her big baby and the only one she considered family now that the league was gone. Eventually she felt the worries of the world vanish as sleep overtook her, but still she held onto him with a death grip as she realized she'd return to her old trait. If anyone dared to take him from her, she could easily get away with it, just like those other 10 bodies they never found. She'd just need to be smart about it, like those times where she wanted to erase all evidence. After all, he was worth it to her, and so long as nobody found out, then Chiki would be fine and they could keep living their happy, normal lives, because she had finally found love and knew living in a world without it, without his love, was not worth living in. Izuku woke up with a mouthful of fluff filling the gaps in his teeth as he sat up from the darkened bedside with a rush of cold air coming from all sides. Shivering at the shitty insulation, he ducked back down to his lover and clung to her, feeling some of that warmth return. Quietly he listened to her breathing, feeling her belly rise and fall under his palms. Somehow he'd woken up before her, which was amazing given how much her episodes of insomnia had her waking up in the middle of the night every so often. He considered whispering in her ear or shaking her, but the last thing he wanted was a crabby, cold and angry Himiko, regardless of how cute that may have been. So with careful shifting he got off the bed and stepped out to the living room where his clothes were exactly where he left them last night. It was a rather drab environment and looked just as lackluster as when he stumbled in so long ago. Yet he still found it to be such a dear place to him despite the shambles, and he couldn't help smiling as he got his clothes on. The air stank of copper, sweat and bodily fluids that brought a bit of joy to him. He was part of here now. His place was with her and everything was right in the world. Though right now he would have killed for some food. Maybe he could make some breakfast for the both of them. It wasn't like Himiko kept a pantry stocked with stuff he could actually cook, but a few Pop-Tarts and milk was never a bad dish either. She'd probably wolf them down like the hungry food gremlin she was anyway, so he made a plate for himself and began to munch as the clock ticked away. There wasn't much to do considering it was Sunday, and unless the office gave another emergency ring then he'd be free. Though he questioned whether he really needed to work sometimes with the money in his bank account. Granted, he knew the stuff was poison, but still he loved to be so close to that fantasy of never needing to worry about money again. Maybe if he worked hard enough then retirement could be attainable, preferably before he turned feeble and gray. He shook his head at the idea. It was pointless to think about that now when he was here with her, away from his troubles for a while. He may as well stay happy for as long as he can before reality comes calling. However, he thought back to those investments Kachan helped him make and remembered that they were bringing in some money at least, so there was that. Izuku pushed it all away and took stock of the room, enjoying the smell and the chill of the air. He was simply glad to be and have her with him. They had a whole day ahead of them and enough money to feast, which was all he could want. Still, he considered maybe getting some training in. As a matter of fact, how long has it been since he sparred with her? Ever since he enlisted with Sato and learned the basics of training, there hasn't been much of a need for him to bother Himiko with that. Lately it's been more of him arriving and using her as a relief valve for his stress. He cringed a little at the prospect of asking her to teach him some of the things she learned before the calamity, since she knew how to fight better than most. It was just such a dark thing to reference that he might push the wrong buttons and piss her off at best or summon a breakdown at worst. Still, the idea of sparring with her again sounded rather nice and a better use of their Sunday than just lazing about and cuddling. Yet as he considered that, there was a creak from the doorway to her room and Himiko came out with a slight lurch in her step. She glared at him with those golden eyes, clearly upset that he had left the room, but despite that Izuku smiled warmly at her as he approached. He opened his arms and embraced her, breathing in the scent of her unwashed body while a grin overtook his lips. "Morning, beautiful. Did you sleep okay?" and quat. The blonde continued to glare daggers at him, but returned the hug and dug her fingers into his back. For a moment she pushed him away to gather her clothes, which were the same barely washed pajamas she had practically made into a second skin with how often she wore them, and had the plate set out for her. "Yeah, but I wish you woke me up sooner." And quat. He laughed at her grogginess and grabbed her by the belly before she could take another step, running his fingers over her form and letting out a few giggles at the joy it brought him. "But it's 4 a.m. Besides, you need the rest with how often you stay up. Now how about you and me do a little training today? You know, shake things up a bit like we used to?" and quat. Himiko groaned a little in annoyance at how he kissed and caressed her, but let him have his way for a moment before clamping on his wrist and pushing outward to free herself. "Fine, but give me a few hours to wake up." And quat. She entered the kitchen and set a cooking pot over one of the stove burners, right as she reached into the fridge to retrieve a half-gallon bag of blood. Opening the tab at the top, she poured it in and allowed it to simmer for a bit. Then a ladle was thrown into the crimson and lifted to her lips. Musing on the gore, she nodded in approval as the rest was funneled into a tall mug which she set on the table next to her meager breakfast. Izuku raised an eyebrow at the amount she was ingesting, but over the past 9 months he had gotten so used to her dietary needs that it didn't occur to him to say anything. Instead, he took a seat across from her and waited for breakfast to be finished, only for the vampire to stare at him questioningly. There was an element of anger, fear and worry in those yellow irises that grew when she took another swig of her sanguine, the red staining her teeth a horror movie red. "So about last night, I want to apologize for acting like I did. I know it was immature of me to just break down over something so silly, but can I ask about who this girl was?" and quat. Instantly the glee faded from his being as Izuku darted his eyes off to the floor, appearing for the first time to be almost defensive at what she said. There was guilt in his expression, a heavy, crushing guilt that she knew just from looking at him was still fresh. A grunt came from his lips and he gazed at her with a different sort of emotion, as if she could usher in forgiveness and let him forget the pain. "I don't want to talk about it." And quat. The tone was reluctant yet firm, that hinted at an avalanche of old emotions that had no intention of being disturbed, and Himiko could read both it and him like a book. If Izuku didn't want to pry into his past, however mundane it was in comparison to her own, then she would leave it be. He deserved as much after putting up with her own insanity for so long. Taking another swig and enjoying how the blood lessened her morning migraine, she mused on what they could do. Her work was done and Cheeky was still dealing with her bullshit. As she saw it, today was a free day. She really didn't feel like sparring. At least not for a time, since it was too active to do right in the morning. Admittedly, she wanted to drag him back to bed and just smother him until they fell back asleep, but she was already up. Part of her resented that since with Cheeky around there were less opportunities for her to rest. She just wanted to lay back and veg out to some film or a shitty podcast or just cuddle like they used to. Then she remembered this was her house and he was her baby. So Himiko arose from the table, walked over to Zuzu and latched onto his arm as she made him stand up. He gave her questioning eyes, but didn't say anything when they retreated to the bedroom and she grabbed the comforter off the couch. With a mild shove, Himiko pushed him on the mattress and crawled next to him, draping the blanket over them both as she nuzzled against his back with a loose hug. She felt a spark of good feelings when Izuku ran a thumb over her knuckles and shut her eyes as she enjoyed the closeness. She didn't really want to sleep now. It was too precious a moment to waste on napping, yet as the blonde tried, it was harder to not relax too much. But she didn't blame herself since the bed was nice and warm and there was that creak of the springs from Zuzu shifting around. Then it was the way his belly, which was flat and just the right kind of squishy to make it comfortable to hold as he breathed, or the way his heartbeat sang into her ears and the smell of his unwashed hair tingled her nose. Himiko drank in the sensation and brought a hand up to that sweet spot near his neck, rolling her fingers over the scarred skin, which made him flinch in the most adorable way. A nice buzz formed in her head at the memories of the times she dug her fangs into that tender patch and listened to him whimper and hold in a scream. Even now there was that element of fear in him as she touched that spot which had his whole body tense, yet he did nothing to resist her. Try as she might, it was impossible to not feel a slight high when he was just letting her have her way. In fact, it had become so much of a problem that she pulled the arm around his torso free and flipped him onto his back before climbing on top of him. He stared up with a mixture of restrained fear and adoration, all the while she could feel him get aroused underneath her as something poked her crotch. She continued to stare down at him, enjoying the buildup of tension in his eyes as questions doubtlessly began to form in his mind. He was wondering if she'd hurt him or if she would make him feel good, and Himiko could see each of those thoughts play out in his eyes and smiled. It wasn't a predatory one filled with teeth and domination, but a soft, kindly one as Himiko brought her hands around the back of his head to cradle it. Her calloused thumbs rubbed against his freckled cheeks, making sure to remember how it felt to touch his face. Slowly she lowered her body down onto him and kissed him with that building passion that was more love than anything else. 3 seconds Himiko had locked her lips to him and enjoyed the little pleasure such a simple, silly thing gave her, only to have it sour when Izuku reached into her waistband and planted his hands on her rear. She withdrew from the kiss with a silent, scolding glare as Izuku lowered his head slightly, but kept his hands where they were. The villainess didn't blame him much. Really, it was her fault for getting him worked up, yet it was just that she wanted something more simple where they could do little things like kiss and hug. Hell, part of her wanted him to tickle her again. Though thinking about it more, she wouldn't mind sinking her fangs into that nice sweet spot of his. It wasn't a hot urge like the other times, but something akin to a kiss yet more. She knew he didn't exactly like it, but the fact he was consenting was enough. But she didn't want to deal with the process of it all, and it began to piss her off. The planning, the first aid kits, the exact communication, making sure he wasn't putting on a tough face, having to hold herself back from everything she wanted at a given moment and consider if it was safe or not. It was enough to ruin a perfectly good day, while other people who don't share her taste can just kiss and suck and fuck without worry, since there's no physical danger involved. They get to act without worry or thinking. They get to just go on instinct and be praised by their partners for it. She, on the other hand, has to worry about whether or not what she fantasizes about or wants is going to kill him, since she was given the short stick with her genetics. Yet that line of thinking made her wonder what kind of quirk a child between her and Zuzu would have. He was quirkless but clearly had evidence of those genes with his hair color, and it was clear his mother's DNA was dominant, and Himiko recalled how her family always genetically favored the mother, so, for some reason she pictured a short, curly-haired boy around his early teenage who looked exactly like Zuzu but with her fangs and feline pupils, setting the blood of animals on fire with his mind. Blinking at her own thoughts, she laid herself on top of her lover and preoccupied the time with suckling his neck while the eager bastard played with her rear. She didn't really care at the moment since they'd done far more to each other, but try as she might, Himiko simply couldn't get in the proper mood to match him. The only thing she wanted was to lay there and enjoy his company, which made her sit up when he moved his hands around to touch her from the front. It came as a shock, and she gave another tired glare at him as Himiko did her best not to snap at him. Normally she'd be more accommodating to his wants, but she just didn't want to deal with the hassle. So Himiko shifted herself to the side and laid herself flat on the empty side of the bed with a reluctant frankness. Zuzu, I'm sorry to say, but it's a little too early for something like that, so can you handle it yourself this time? And quat. If there ever was a look of dejection, disappointment and anger on his face, it was now. The expression bordered on resentment with how displeased he was, and it showed when Izuku turned around and gripped her across the torso, clinging to her in an act of needy defiance. His muscles bulged against her with the force of an iron curtain as he refused to let go and nuzzled into her lower shoulder. "No, I'm staying right here and nothing's changing that dot and quat." Himiko rolled her eyes at the pettiness in his voice, but also felt her heart skip a beat at how cute he sounded. It wasn't like they had a lot to do, and if he wanted to make a battle of wills then so be it. Yet her tune changed somewhat when he started to suckle her neck and get more handsy with her body. She knew they'd be here all day at this rate, but the slasher never got the chance to give in right when she wanted due to his adorable ass kissing her in that soft, adoring manner as he got on top of her and gave a smile so warm it likely could pay her heating bill for the rest of the year. A hand was latched to her cheeks and there was a certain restrained giddiness to his eyes, like a hound seeing its owner or a lonely man his lover, and she knew he'd start freaking out over her, yet that was more than fine as Zuzu started to speak in that low, attentive way she adored. "I love you. I really do, and I don't think I say that nearly enough dot and quat." Their faces were a few inches apart, and as was his right, Izuku leaned forward and kissed her, all the while his hands touched her neck, her arms, her belly, wherever he could grasp her body, which made Himiko squirm a bit under the weight. Begrudgingly she allowed the smile creeping up on her to win and ran her fingers through his hair. "You do more than enough, Zuzu, and I know you love me dot and quat." He had a quality to his gaze now that seemed almost comforting as he dragged a thumb over her cheeks, one that denoted satisfaction and an almost subtle joy. "Yeah, but a person speaks through their actions, and frankly I think I've been behind in doing that for you dot and quat." And there it was, she saw the aroused little sparkle in that sea of green, one that sought to play her heart like an instrument. She let out a rather smug grin at the attempt, even as Izuku knew she saw what he was thinking. Himiko bopped him on the nose as the scene grew more cliché by the second. "You wouldn't be saying that in an attempt to get me to acquiesce to your whims and get naked, among the many other things you likely wished to do to me and quat." The quirkless man mimicked his lover's grin and ran a hand through her knotted hair, making sure to study those eyes of the greatest gold. "Oh no, I certainly am, but I'm serious when I say that. I want to do more for you, show you exactly how much you mean to me. So far it's been just the physical, and I want to do more for you dot and quat." Himiko rolled her eyes once more and hugged him, taking in the scent of his body and the pleasing way he was crushed up against her. "The sheer fact you're even willing to stay in contact with me after all I've told you about myself is proof enough. You're one of the only people in the world who haven't just written me off as a monster for what I did and then you didn't scream at seeing my quirk, which is something else, though I think you liked it a bit too much dot and quat." It was at that moment Himiko realized she should not have said that, since there was a gleam in his eyes, a jovial, mischievous one that saw the discomfort and wanted nothing more than to annoy it. He brought himself a little closer and watched the reflex she had in regards to her power and gave that stupid grin as he kissed her. "Hey, it isn't my fault you're so damn incredible and taste so good dot and quat." Instantly Himiko cringed at his words and recalled how he ate her quirk goop, shifting her eyes away in shame at her own functions, which resulted in a blush. "Oh shut up, you were just being nasty. Honestly, who the hell sees a pile of gray goo come out of someone's skin and decides to actually eat it and quat." Izuku shook his head mirthfully and kissed her again, loving how she was wallowing in her annoyance while he held her. "I do. I've always had a bit of an interest in quirks, and with you being, well, it was the first time in years I've been able to see such a remarkable quirk, or rather taste. Besides, if I like eating that then no harm done since we're both into freaky stuff dot and quat." Himiko glared at him and let her disgust be known. "But, it's like you're eating my waste or something. That stuff is literally dead skin cells my body throws away after the blood is digested, and it always has this gross, lukewarm feeling when it sloshes off. I just don't see how you can touch or much less eat the stuff dot and quat." He shrugged and rubbed a hand on her arm. "It's just a part of you, and besides it was a moment of curiosity that made me pick it up dot and quat." She gave him a look that was rather testy. "So you wouldn't do it again and quat?" Again he shrugged. Maybe. I guess it depends on how hungry I get afterwards dot and quat." She flicked him on the cheek with a glare. "Don't be gross dot and quat." Now he rolled his eyes. "Ain't that the pot calling the kettle black? You're a nasty pervert yourself darling, or need I remind you of how you've literally drank my blood? Point being, we're birds of a feather, and if I want to bite off some of that goop from you then it isn't any different. We're here for each other in whatever we need, and if you want to set a boundary there then I'm fine with it. But I told you ahead of time that I was weird dot and quat." She held his gaze for a time, seeing how there was a little spark of annoyance that brought a slight smile to her face as she found her own button to push. Yet she set the game aside and cuddled a tad closer to him and enjoyed it. "Alright, Capitan talks a lot. You win. Let's just go to the living room since I'm starting to overheat and quat." She was cut off by a knock erupting from the front door, making them both tense up like meerkats in the tall grass. Their eyes met and Izuku was the first to speak with a cautious, alert tone that sounded nothing like his usual self. "Are you expecting someone and quat?" Himiko shared in his alarm, as this was first time anyone had ever intruded on their home, and years of living on the run and surviving raids came back as she reached into the sides of her headboard and withdrew a pocket knife from a built-in slot, letting the upward curving single-edged blade of dark steel open with a click as she got out of the bed without so much as a sound being made. "No, I'm not." And quat. Not needing another hint, he followed after with his own knife, the one she threw at him those long months ago when they first met, being gripped in a white knuckles fist while he made enough noise to be comparable to a tank with how she moved as silently as the dead. There came another knock when they reached the door, and taking the lead after checking with his lover, Izuku opened it, making sure to keep his knife hidden in his pocket as he faced the intruder. To his surprise, Izuku came face to face with two people, one he knew personally and one he knew from television. Standing on the other side of the door in an office attire of suits were Ochako and the pro-hero Elemental, who appeared perpetually pissed off as he stared from his half-burned face with those heterochromatic eyes of green and blue. They both carried clipboards and pens, looking for all the world like basic public servants, except one of them gave such a cold questioning stare at him that it instantly put him on edge. The hot and cold hero studied him for a moment before speaking in a tone so icy that it could cut air. "We're employees of the Public Safety Commission here to see a certain woman by the name of Himiko Ito. Is she anywhere around?" And quat. Izuku shot his eyes over to Ochako, who remained utterly silent and avoided his gaze with guilt and shame as her fingers tapped the clipboard in her hands. Then, like a gust of wind, Himiko appeared behind him and pulled him aside, sounding for all the world like someone held at gunpoint. "Oh, Mr. Todoroki, Ms. Uraka, how nice to see you both again. I apologize for my boyfriend, he's rather unaware of the procedures. Now can I get either of you some nice tea?" And quat. The number 3 hero glared indifferently at the villainess as his eyes studied her expressions than that of the quirkless man. Izuku found himself unable to break eye contact, as it was like he was being examined right down to his soul, only to be grabbed back by his partner as the two heroes entered their home. The heir of the Todoroki bloodline sniffed at the air and remained like unfeeling glass as he clicked his pen. "No, thank you, Ms. Ito. Now let's proceed with the task at hand." And quat. Izuku noticed how neither of them removed their shoes and immediately took both spots on the sofa, leaving himself and Himiko to sit on the love seat. The tension in the room was mounting as the more successful man continued to stare at the couple with silent, judging eyes that neither of them could read, all the while the woman they had been so close to refused to meet their eyes and kept her attention to the paper on her clipboard. Todoroki reached into his pocket and took out a small device which was no larger than the palm of his hand and set it on the coffee table before tapping the power icon. Again his icy gaze shot through the pair as he cleared his throat and leaned forward with his elbows resting on his knees as he brought his hands together. "Now then, Ms. Ito, as of this moment your track record within the rehabilitation program has been spotless, which I feel the need to congratulate you on. You've proven that there can be hope for anyone. However, this visit is still required as per your agreement with the Commission and the courts. Now we'd like to start with the basic questions, but your co-sponsor has recently complicated the procedure given your unique relationship, so I'll be the one conducting the review." And quat. There was a detectable note of discomfort when he said those last words, and Ochako blushed to a noticeable amount as she kept her head to the papers. Then the hero shifted his attention to Izuku with a more than curious, if not accusing, eye. "That being said, I'd like to interview your partner afterwards if that would be fine." And quat. Himiko again smiled like her entire life was in danger and submerged the anxiety as best she could with an attempt at being courteous, though she had latched tightly to Izuku's arm like he was about to disappear. "That'd be more than all right, sir. I'm sure Zuzu would happily answer any questions you have." And quat. Not left with many options, Izuku shrugged nervously and agreed as politely as he could. "I don't mind answering whatever you have to ask." And quat. Todoroki nodded and clicked his pen, starting to mark the paper on the clipboard. Again his chilling eyes bore into the far less powerful man and back to the beautiful murderer, before bringing his line of sight upward to a photo on the wall depicting Himiko giving bunny ears to a man who looked annoyed beyond belief with her antics as his face, neck and arms, burned to a dreadful purple crisp, flickered bits of blue fire. An expression of subtle regret colored Todoroki's eyes that was buried under his professionalism as he gestured his pen at Himiko. "Now then, to start off, have you been included in, committed or gained any knowledge of any type of criminal activity as of the current year?" And quat. The blonde let go of her lover and sat up straight with a polite, even and controlled demeanor that anyone facing the legal system used. "None save for a bit of internet piracy." And quat. The youngest son of fire nodded and scribbled it down, flipping over to the next form and absent-mindedly fingering his pen. "Have you been in contact with any persons connected to a criminal record as of this year?" And quat. Himiko shook her head and answered primly, "No, not one." And quat. Again Todoroki nodded and marked it down before turning to the next page. "Are you in possession of any illegal contraband?" And quat. She shook her head once more without missing a beat, even as Izuku felt the knife in his own pocket start to weigh down like an anvil. "No, sir." And quat. Another nod, Another mark and a new turned page from the hero. Have you been consistent with the required consumption of blood mandated by the courts, which is no less than a half-gallon per day to maintain your sensibilities? ? She nodded and gestured to the overly large cup on the dining table, which was still stained red at the rim. Yes sir, I keep my daily intake at over a gallon a day and my stock is filled with at least 60 gallons at a time. It was written down and the page flipped, but this time he looked up from the board and gave a judging, if not pitying gaze as he put his tool aside. Going off the records, are you in need of any help in procuring your stock? ? Himiko pursed her lips with lowered eyes, not scornful as she usually would be, and dragged her attention to Izuku for a moment as if needing his reassurance as shame mounted on her face. I appreciate the kindness sir, but I manage well enough. Most of the stuff is dirt cheap since most people just throw the blood away and the government helps cover the cost. Todoroki studied her for a time and nodded as he brought his pen back up. Very well, moving on. Have you had any homicidal urges, thoughts, fantasies or actions in the past 3 months? ? There was a pause and a blush from the villainess as she looked to her boyfriend like he was the evidence of all her wrongdoings before sticking her gaze to the floor. No, but, as of late I've been given the circumstances to exercise some violent ones. ? The hero eyed Izuku coldly as the quirkless man blushed 3 times as much, feeling like he had been stripped naked when that removed tone struck him again with a hint of aggression leveled at either of the two lower people. I assume these were consensual happenings? ? Izuku blinked as he realized what was asked and became instantly flustered as he sought to perhaps hide Himiko in his arms to preserve their dignity. Why yeah, completely consensual all around. ? Disgust possessed Todoroki's face for a few scant seconds as he dotted down the information. Soon he scanned the next page and drew his vision at his fellow top hero for a sparse time before clearing his throat. That concludes the basics of the visit, the rest of which were filed away weeks ago by Ms. Uraka. Which leaves us to your part, Mr. Midoriya, so if you would, may we proceed? ? Izuku flinched at his name being used, but assumed it was simply due to either Ochako telling him or how his name was listed in the hero registry. Supplanting his own discomfort, he tried to return the professionalism given by the crime fighter. By all means. ? Todoroki clicked his pen a few times and began to cross and dot whatever was on that page for a few moments until he brought his attention upward to the other man. His eyes squinted for a heartbeat, then they went to Ochako like the woman held some blame in this. He said nothing as he inhaled deeply of the stained air with a tired, fed-up expression under his stoic persona. Then the clipboard was cast to the coffee table along with the pen, leaving the element user to stare at the quirkless sidekick with yet another calculating gaze, one that seemed to hold concern? It was hard to tell. With a slow move of his left hand, Todoroki extended it, palm open, as a slight chill gathered in the room and a small sphere of ice no larger than a gumdrop formed in that hand. Would you care for one, Mr. Midoriya? I find it helps clear the mind. ? There was a part of that statement, or rather the situation, which bit at his mind. It rang close to those scenes in movies where the interrogators tried to gauge guilt with an offer of food and if it was accepted or not. Keeping that in mind, Izuku reached out and took the ball. Thank you. ? Popping it into his mouth, the hero nodded in approval with a heavy expression hidden in his person. Not a problem. Now then, if you mind me first getting to the core of the matter so this may go far smoother, I'll be upfront and ask, are you aware of what she has done? The crimes she committed? ? There was a weight to that question, one that sounded sure and puritanical in nature. Izuku chewed the sphere, feeling it break upon his teeth with a satisfying crunch that wet his throat when he stared back, with almost defiance alight in his eyes. Yes, I am. I know about her record in well enough detail, and I know she did a sentence in Tartarus, along with the body count. Is that an issue? ? Disbelief was ripe on Todoroki's brow as he heard that, looking like he had heard the man admit to being mad. Yet to his credit, the emotion fled and he regained his usual professional indifference with a strong silence that lingered between the two of them in a way it never had between any of the women. Eventually, curiosity overtook that quiet and he gave another question, perhaps from honest confusion that sounded unshakable as anything. Not at all, but if I may ask, why exactly are you with her? ? Anger sparked inside Izuku's soul and he nearly stood from his seat if not for remembering what was at stake for his darling. Still it showed brightly and lethally, like a slowly erupting fire that was kept at bay by the slightest of iron. He exhaled and placed a hand on Himiko's far shoulder, crushing her to him in a possessive, assertive way, in part to calm himself and in part to make it clear that she was his. It was then Izuku noticed the gold wedding band on the hero's ring finger and his ire died down as he threw a challenging, undaunted glare at him for daring to question his devotion to her. The same reason you wear that ring for who you love. She completes me. ? The hot and cold user stared at him blankly for a few empty minutes until finally, with an almost hidden grimace about him, stood up from the sofa and picked up his recording device and clipboard, along with his pen. He stared at the photo of the blue flame user on the wall for a heartbeat with that same regret obviously eating at him, then turned to address the couple. I see. Well, thank you both for your time and feel free to contact us if there's any issues. As for that, we'll be taking our leave now. You can expect us back within a few months. Have a good day and I wish you luck in the future. And quote. Todoroki bowed respectfully to them as Ochako arose from the sofa and did the same. Then they left out the front door like the whole event never happened, leaving the two to themselves. Izuku and Himiko slowly turned and embraced each other with the blonde decompressing in his arms. She let out a breath neither knew she was holding in and sounded tired beyond belief. Thank you Zuzu, you have no idea how much you helped save my ass back there. He's always been a hard ass towards me and if you slipped up then it would be hell. And quote. Izuku raised an eyebrow at the statement and found himself drawn to the same photo the number 3 hero was so attracted to. He had no idea who this mystery person in it was, though he likely had to be a villain since he was seen in other photos on the wall and, loath as he was to judge solely on appearance, someone who looked like a walking pile of dead, burned skin wasn't the friendliest of faces. Thinking about it, there was some news about a member of the Todoroki family fighting alongside PLA troops way back in the war, so, that answered that question at least. His beloved was an assassin for the people who ruined his life and nearly ruined the world. Surprisingly, he wasn't nearly as taken aback by this as he thought he should be. Then again, after all he learned about Himiko, it seemed rather tame. So she was a villain on their side back in the day. It didn't change who she was now and what they were to each other. Izuku was brought back to reality when he felt the touch of soft lips on his mouth as Himiko pushed him down and started to assault him with affection. It wasn't a lusty thing, but rather her trying to convey her passion and gratitude as he had learned. Going with the flow, he leaned back and let her have her way with him until it simmered into a deep hug that was accompanied by a few soft whimpers as she rubbed her cheeks on him. I need you, you know. I don't think I've ever said that, but my life would be shit without you Zuzu. And quote. He smiled as her nails dug into his back and her eyes portrayed the deepest of thanks which made his heart soar as he wrapped an arm around her. Likewise darling. Now then how about we kill some time ? And quote. Himiko gave a thumbs up as she allowed herself to be hoisted into the air and taken back to the bedroom where they laid as they once had, letting themselves enjoy the solitude of their company and taking solace in the devotion of the other as the sun began to rise over the horizon, promising new challenges even as they enraptured in their comfort. Thank you for making it to the end. You absolute mad lad. Let me know if you want me to keep this one going, or if you have suggestions on what ifs you want. And subscribe if you like. See you later.